Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it with my eyes closed. I was lying on my back trying to fall asleep. Not really tired, but not awake enough to do anything else. My name's Lewis. It was a weekday night, nothing unusual. Quiet street, semi-detached house, curtains pulled, lights off. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting in the dark, but the room kept getting brighter, not steadily, in pulses. Slow, soft increases in light, like distant lightning behind clouds, except there was no sound. No rumble, no flicker of a storm, just a gradual brightening, then fading. I kept my eyes closed for a bit, trying to ignore it. You know how sometimes your eyelids pick up light changes from outside, like a car passing or someone switching something on? It felt like that, but slower, more controlled. The light would build for a couple seconds, hold very slightly, then fade back out. Then a pause, then again. I opened my eyes. The room was dim, but I could see the edges of things more clearly than I should have been able to. The wardrobe, the chair by the wall, the outline of the door. Then it dimmed again. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling. Another pulse. The room brightened slowly. No shadows moved. That's what stood out first. The light increased, but nothing shifted. No angle change. No source I could identify. Just more visibility. Then it faded. I sat up a little, leaning on one elbow. Waited. Another pulse. Same thing. Gradual increase. Then fade. I checked my phone. 2:18, no notifications, no weather alerts. I listened carefully. Nothing. No wind outside, no distant thunder, no cars. The house was completely still. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat up fully. The floor felt cold under my feet. I waited through another pulse. This time I watched the walls. The brightness increased evenly, like the light wasn't coming from one direction. It was just filling the room, then fading again. I stood up and walked to the window. The curtain was closed, but not fully tight. A thin gap at the edge. I pulled it back slightly. Outside was dark, completely normal. Street light down the road, faint glow from a neighbor's window. Nothing unusual. No flashes, no light sources. I looked up at the sky, clear, no clouds, no storm. I stepped back from the window. Another pulse hit. The room brightened again, but outside stayed the same. That's when I noticed something else. The light inside didn't match anything outside. It was slightly cooler. Almost white, but not quite. I walked back to the bed slowly, sat down again, waited another pulse, same pattern, same my phone again, 0219. Only a minute had passed. It felt longer. I stayed sitting there, counting the intervals, roughly 10 seconds between pulses, maybe a bit more. I tried to match it to anything, distant lights, electrical issues, nothing made sense. I got up again and checked the hallway. Opened the door slowly. Dark. No lights on anywhere. The rest of the house was quiet. I stood there for a moment, then went back into my room and closed the door. Another pulse. The room brightened. I looked directly at the ceiling this time, trying to see if the light had any direction to it. It didn't. No source. No shadow shift. Just a uniform increase in brightness. Then it faded again. I felt that pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, like a slight change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't fully go away. I sat back on the bed, watching. Another pulse. The pressure increased slightly with it, then eased as the light faded. I checked my phone again. 2:21. Time was moving normally. I stayed there, watching the pulses. They continued the same way. Same timing. Same intensity. After a while, I got tired of trying to figure it out. Not sleepy. Just drained. I lay back down, still facing the ceiling. Let the pulses happen without reacting to them. Eventually, I closed my eyes again. The light still came through my eyelids. Same pattern, same slow build and fade. At some point, I must have drifted, not fully asleep. Just that in-between state. Then I woke up again, suddenly like something had stopped. The room was dark, no pulse, no brightness, just normal night. I sat up quickly, waited. Nothing happened. I checked my phone. 0233. I frowned. That didn't feel right. I'd last checked it at 0221. I hadn't been asleep that long. It didn't feel like it. I unlocked the phone and looked at the clock app. No alarms, no missed notifications, nothing to explain the gap. I stood up and went to the window again. Pulled the curtain back fully this time. The street was still, no movement, no light changes, everything normal. I looked up at the sky, still clear, still quiet. I went back to the bed slowly, sat down, checked the phone again. Time was moving normally now. I waited for another pulse. Nothing came. The room stayed dark. The pressure in my ears was gone. Everything felt normal again. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to replay it, the pulses, the timing, the way the light filled the room without a source. And the part I couldn't shake was the gap. 12 minutes gone. No transition, no memory of it passing. Just skipped. Like the light hadn't just been outside or even in the room, but somehow involved in that missing stretch of time, like whatever was causing it didn't just affect what I could see, but how long I was actually there to see it. I noticed it because my shadow didn't match where the sun was. My name's Toby. I was out hiking alone on a ridge trail I'd done a few times before. Nothing extreme, just a steady climb up through open ground with a few scattered trees, then a long stretch along the top where you can see for miles if the weather's clear. That day it wasn't. It was overcast, low cloud cover, but bright enough that you could still see everything clearly. No direct sunlight, just that flat gray light that comes through the clouds. It was early afternoon, maybe around 2. I'd stopped for a break near the top, just off the trail where the ground flattened out a bit. Sat down on a rock, had some water, checked my phone. No signal, which was normal up there. After a few minutes, I stood up again and stretched. That's when I saw my shadow. It was stretched out long in front of me, but the light wasn't coming from behind me. There wasn't even a clear direction to it. The sky was evenly gray, no breaks in the cloud, no sun visible. I turned slightly, trying to figure out where the light source could be. The shadow didn't shift the way it should. It stayed extended in that same direction, like it was anchored. I took a step forward. The shadow moved with me, but the angle stayed wrong. Too sharp, too defined for that kind of lighting. I looked down at it, frowning. The edges were darker than they should have been, almost too clean, like it was being cast by a direct light, not diffused through clouds. I turned around slowly, checked behind me, nothing. Just open ground and the slope dropping away, no break in the cloud, no sunlight. I looked back down. The shadow was still there, same direction, same length. I raised my hand slightly. The shadow followed, but there was a slight delay. Not much, just enough that I noticed it, like it caught up a fraction of a second later. I held my hand still. The shadow matched again. I lowered it, same tiny delay. That's when I started feeling uneasy, not panicked, just off, like something wasn't lining up properly. I stepped forward again. The shadow stretched ahead of me, still too long for the conditions, still too sharp. I looked around, scanning the ground, the horizon. Nothing stood out. No other shadows looked like that. The rocks nearby had faint, soft edges. Mine was darker, clearer, more defined. I turned again, trying to see if maybe the terrain was causing it somehow. Same result. Then the shadow changed, just slightly. It shortened a bit, not gradually, just a quick shift. I froze, looked down. The angle had adjusted. Still wrong, but different, like the light source had moved. I slowly lifted my head and looked up. At first, I didn't see anything, just the same gray cloud cover. Flat, unbroken. Then I noticed a darker patch, high above, barely visible. It wasn't a cloud. It was too smooth, too uniform. A shape against the clouds, but only just, like it was reflecting less light than everything else. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The edges became clearer the longer I looked. Not sharp, but defined enough to see that it was there. It was large. Hard to judge exactly, but it stretched wider than I expected, and it was moving, slowly, drifting across the sky. No sound, no visible propulsion, just a steady, silent movement. I stood there, watching it. My shadow shifted again. The angle changed to match whatever that thing was doing overhead. That's when it clicked. The shadow wasn't coming from the sky in general. It was coming from that, whatever it was. I kept looking up, trying to see more detail. The surface looked smooth, metallic, maybe, but muted, not shiny, just slightly reflected in a way that didn't match the clouds. There were no lights on it, no markings that I could see, just that dark, curved shape. It passed over me slowly. The shadow shortened as it moved, then stretched out in the opposite direction, perfectly in sync with it. I felt that pressure in my ears, like when you change altitude quickly, subtle but noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't fully clear. The hair felt heavier for a moment. Still no sound. Even the usual background noise felt reduced. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just me and that thing moving overhead. I took a step back without really thinking. My eyes stayed locked on it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just continued drifting. Eventually it moved far enough that the contrast faded. It blended back into the cloud cover. The edges softened. Then it was gone. Or at least I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the same spot, waiting for it to reappear. It didn't. I looked down. My shadow had returned to normal. Faint. Diffused. Barely there, like it should have been under that kind of sky. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon again. Everything looked ordinary. The ridge, the distant hills, nothing out of place. I stayed up there a bit longer, but I didn't feel like continuing the hike. Something about it stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. I headed back down the trail, checking the sky every few minutes. Nothing else appeared. No change in the light. No movement overhead. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just seeing it. It was how my shadow reacted first. Like whatever passed above me was already there, affecting the light, before I even realized to look up, and how it moved slow enough that if I hadn't noticed that small detail, I probably would have walked right under it without ever knowing anything was there. I saw the first flash just after I finished hanging my food bag. It was early October, cold enough that my breath showed, but not cold enough to freeze anything. I was camping alone in Green Ridge State Forest, out in western Maryland, on a loop I'd hiked twice before. It wasn't deep wilderness, not really. You could reach a road if you walked far enough in any direction. But once the sun went down, it felt bigger than it was. I'd taken the Pine Lick Trail in around noon and cut over toward an old campsite near a creek. It wasn't an official site, just a flat patch of ground where people had clearly camped before, with a stone fire ring and a couple of logs dragged up as seats. I didn't sign the visitor log at the trailhead because the box was stuffed with wet paper and the pen was gone. I remember that clearly because I stood there for a second with my pack on, annoyed, before deciding it didn't matter. By dusk, the temperature dropped fast. The trees were mostly bare near the tops, and every little sound carried. Leaves scraping, branches clicking together, water moving over rocks in the creek. I made a small fire, ate noodles from a pouch, and sat there with my hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that tasted burnt, even though it was instant. I wasn't scared. I liked hiking alone. I liked how simple everything got once you were out there. Eat, drink, stay warm, sleep. Then the woods lit up white, not lightning. There were no clouds. The sky above the trees was clear enough that I could see stars between the branches. The flash came from the north, deeper in the forest, past the creek and up the slope beyond it. It lasted less than a second, bright enough to make the tree trunks jump out in hard shadows. Then everything went dark again. I stood up too quickly and spilled coffee on my boot. For a few seconds I just listened. No thunder, no voices, no engine. I told myself it was a headlamp, maybe another hiker, maybe a hunter checking something, even though hunting wasn't allowed in that section at night. I waited for another light, expecting to see it bob between the trees. Nothing. I sat back down, but I didn't relax. About 10 minutes later, it flashed again. Same direction, same white light. This time it lasted a little longer, maybe 2 seconds. Long enough for me to see the creek shine like a strip of metal and the underside of the branches turn pale. Then darkness. The fire popped, and I jumped like an idiot. I pulled my headlamp on and walked to the edge of the campsite. I didn't cross the creek. I just stood there, aimed the beam into the trees, and saw nothing but trunks and dead leaves. The light from my headlamp felt weak and personal compared to whatever had flashed out there. I called out, "Hello?" My voice went flat in the woods. No answer. The third flash happened while I was still standing there. It came from farther right this time, lower to the ground. For a second I saw a shape between the trees. Not a person. Not clearly. Just something vertical and dark, like a narrow piece of machinery standing where machinery shouldn't be. It reflected the light along one edge, then it was gone. I backed up until my heel hit the fire ring. That was when I heard the noise. A metallic sound, faint but clear. 3 short taps, like someone striking a pipe with a wrench, then a pause, then 2 more. It didn't echo right, it sounded close and far at the same time. I killed the fire after that, which was probably dumb because then I had no light except my headlamp, but the fire made me feel too visible. I crawled into my tent around 9, fully dressed, boots next to me, knife clipped inside the pocket of my pack. I lay there listening. The woods settled into normal sounds for a while. Creek, wind, leaves. A barred owl called once somewhere down the ridge. I almost convinced myself the flashes were from someone messing around with a spotlight. Then around 11:30, something moved outside the tent. Not an animal rustling through leaves. Footsteps, slow, heavy steps, circling. I held my breath. The steps stopped near the front of the tent. I could see nothing through the fabric, only darkness and the faint outline of my pack in the vestibule. My heart was beating so hard it felt like the sleeping pad was moving under me. Then came the metallic tapping again. 1 tap, 2, 3. Right outside the tent. I whispered, "Hey." No answer. The steps resumed, moving around the tent in a slow circle. Whoever it was didn't stumble or brush against branches. The pace was too even. I thought of a ranger, then a hunter, then someone lost. None of those made sense. I reached for my phone. No signal. The screen showed 11:42. Then it blinked and showed 1:08. I stared at it. I hadn't fallen asleep. I knew I hadn't. I'd been lying there, awake, listening to footsteps. But more than an hour had disappeared off the clock. The footsteps stopped. Farther away now, near the creek, the woods flashed white again. The tent lit up from all sides like daylight had been switched on for a heartbeat. In that brief light, I saw the silhouette of a person standing outside the tent wall. Tall, still. Then darkness came back, and the shape was gone. I didn't sleep. I might have drifted in and out for a few minutes, but I never felt like I actually slept. I stayed in the tent until the sky turned gray. Morning made everything look stupid. The creek was just a creek. The trees were just trees. My tent sat in a flat little clearing, damp with dew. No strange machinery, no lights, no people. Then I saw the prints. Boot prints circled my tent. Not one pass. Several. They went all the way around, overlapping in the wet leaves and soft dirt. Big prints, larger than mine, with a tread pattern I didn't recognize. The weird thing was how close they were to the tent. Whoever had made them had walked inches from the fabric without touching it. I crouched beside one. The heel was too narrow. The toe was squared off. The tread looked like 3 straight bars, repeated exactly. Not like hiking boots. Not work boots either. The prints continued toward the creek. I followed them a few yards, then stopped. They ended at the water, not on the bank, not where someone would have stepped across. They went straight to the edge and stopped in the mud. No prints on the other side. I packed faster than I ever had in my life. On the way back, I kept checking behind me. The trail looked normal, but everything sounded too sharp. Once, high in the trees to my left, I heard the metallic tapping again. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. I didn't stop. At the trailhead, there were 3 other cars besides mine. No black sedan, no ranger truck. The visitor log box still had wet paper stuffed inside, same as the day before. I opened it and looked anyway. My name wasn't there, obviously, but someone had written the words Pine Lick in neat black ink across the top page. No date, no name, just the trail I'd used. I drove into the nearest town because I wanted coffee and people around me. There was a diner by the gas station, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a handwritten sign for pie. I sat at the counter in the same clothes I'd slept in and ordered eggs, even though I wasn't hungry. The waitress, a woman named Marcy according to her tag, filled my coffee and said, "Rough night?" I must have looked worse than I realized. "Camping," I said. She nodded like that explained everything. I was halfway through my coffee when the bell over the door rang. 2 men walked in. Both wore dark suits under dark overcoats. Not outdoor clothes. Not hiking clothes. Dress shoes, clean and polished, even though the parking lot outside was muddy. One was tall and thin, with a long face and dark hair combed tight to his head. The other was shorter, broader, with a round face and a calm little smile that didn't fit the room. They didn't wait to be seated. They walked straight to the counter and sat 1 stool away from me. Marcy came over with menus. The taller one raised a hand slightly. "Coffee only." The shorter one said, "Nothing for me." Marcy glanced at me, like she wanted to make a joke but thought better of it. She poured one coffee and walked away. The tall man didn't drink it. He turned toward me. Mr. Nolan Pierce? I felt my hand tighten around the mug. Yeah? We wanted to ask a few questions about your overnight stay in the forest. I stared at him. I didn't tell anyone about that. No, the shorter man said. You didn't. His smile stayed where it was. The taller one took out a small notebook. You used Pine Lick Trail yesterday afternoon. I didn't answer. You camped near the creek below the northern slope, he continued. Unofficial site. Stone fire ring. 2 logs arranged east-west. I set the mug down. How do you know that? He looked at his notebook like the answer was there. It was noted. By who? The shorter man tilted his head. That's not useful. I almost got up and left, but my legs felt weak. There were people around. Marcy was 20 feet away, refilling ketchup bottles. A guy in a work jacket sat in a booth reading the paper. Normal people, normal morning. That made the whole thing feel even worse, like I was trapped inside something only I could see. The taller man asked, Did you hear metallic noises during the night? I looked at him. He nodded once, like my face had answered. Pattern, he asked. I swallowed. I don't know. 3, pause. 2? I didn't say anything. The shorter man's smile faded slightly. So yes. What were the lights? I asked. The tall one wrote something down before answering. Intermittent illumination. I know what lights are. We don't know that you do, the shorter one said gently. That shut me up for a second. The taller man asked whether I had crossed the creek, whether I had approached the source, whether I had touched any metal surfaces. No, I said. Good, he replied. Good, why? He didn't answer. The shorter man leaned slightly closer. Did anyone speak to you? No. Did you speak to anyone? I called out once. What did you say? Hello. He looked at the taller man. The taller man wrote it down. It answered, the shorter one asked. No. He looked relieved. Then the taller man asked about the boot prints. Not whether I'd seen prints. He asked, How many times did the prints circle the tent? I felt cold all over. I didn't count. You should have. That was the first thing either of them said that sounded judgmental. I was busy leaving, I said. The shorter man nodded. Understandable. Marcy came back and topped off my coffee. She looked at the 2 men. You boys need anything else? The taller one looked at her for a moment too long. No, thank you, he said. She walked away slower than before. I asked if they were rangers. No, the taller one said. Police? No. Then what are you? The shorter man smiled again. Late. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. The taller man said, There was no need for you to sign the visitor log. I couldn't. It was wet? Yes. Then why bring it up? Because we need to know whether you were officially present. I was there. Officially, he repeated. I remembered the word Pine Lick written on the log page that morning. You wrote that, I said. The shorter man looked almost amused. No, the taller one closed his notebook. You should avoid that area for the rest of the season. I already planned to. That's good. And if I don't? The shorter man looked past me out the diner window toward the hills. Then something may follow the route you opened. I didn't like that sentence. I didn't like the way he said opened, like a trail was more than a trail. The tall man finally picked up his coffee. He didn't drink it. He just held the mug in both hands. Have you noticed anything missing? He asked. From my pack? From your memory. I almost laughed, but it died in my throat. Because there was something. Between checking my phone at 11:42 and seeing 108, I had a blank spot that wasn't sleep. Not exactly. It felt like a room in my head with the door closed. I knew something was behind it because I could feel its shape. The shorter man watched me carefully. Don't force it, he said. What? The missing part. Why? The taller man answered. Because it may not be yours. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The bell over the diner door rang as someone else came in, and I flinched. When I looked back, the 2 men were standing minute. The taller one placed a $10 bill under the untouched coffee. Thank you for confirming the sound pattern, he said. I didn't confirm anything. He gave me a polite smile. You did enough. They walked out of the diner. I turned on the stool and watched through the window. They crossed the parking lot toward the side of the building. No car waited out front. No one picked them up. They passed behind a parked delivery van and didn't come out the other side. Marcy came over a minute later. Friends of yours? She asked. No. She frowned at the door. They ask you about the woods? I looked at her. She wiped the counter slowly, eyes down. People see things up there sometimes. What kind of things? She shrugged. Lights. Smoke when there's no fire. Men who don't look cold when everyone else is freezing. I asked if she'd seen the two men before. She shook her head. Not those ones. That didn't make me feel better. I paid and drove home. For 2 days, I unpacked nothing. My tent sat in the trunk. My pack leaned by the back door. I told myself I'd clean everything once I felt normal. On the third day, I finally pulled the tent out and spread it on the garage floor. There was mud on the outside where I'd packed it wet. Leaves stuck to the seams. Normal stuff. Then I found a mark near the door flap. A line pressed into the fabric, dark and shiny, like something hot had touched it without burning through. 3 short marks. A gap. 2 short marks. Same pattern as the taps. I threw the tent away that night. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail was 6 seconds long. No words. Just metallic tapping. 3. Pause. 2. I deleted it. Then I sat on my kitchen floor until morning, listening to the refrigerator hum and trying not to count the sounds it made. My brother-in-law's cabin sat above Dillon Reservoir in Colorado. Not right on the water, but close enough that you could walk down through the pines in 10 minutes if the snow wasn't too deep. It was February, the kind of cold that made car doors stick and made your nose hurt when you breathed too fast. I was there by myself for 3 nights because I'd needed somewhere quiet to work. My sister and her husband used the place mostly in summer, and he'd told me the heater worked fine, as long as I kept the wood stove going in the evenings. He also warned me not to mess around on the reservoir unless I knew the ice was safe. I didn't plan to. On the second afternoon, I walked into town for groceries and coffee. The sky had been gray all morning, but the snow held off. By the time I started back, it was already getting dark in that early winter way where everything turns blue before you're ready for it. I took the road halfway, then cut down toward the reservoir because it was shorter. I'd seen other people walking across the ice earlier that day. There were ski tracks, boot prints, even a couple of snowmobile trails crossing from one side to the other. It didn't seem reckless at the time. The ice looked solid, covered in packed snow, except for places where the wind had scraped it bare and left cloudy gray patches. I could see lights from houses on the far shore. The cabin was up in the trees beyond them. It was quiet enough that I heard my coat rubbing when I walked. I had a backpack with groceries, 1 paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and my phone at about 20%. I remember thinking I should have brought gloves with better grip because the snow crust kept sliding under my boots. I was maybe a quarter of the way across when I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was a reflection from one of the houses. It sat under the ice several yards to my left, maybe 15 or 20 feet away. Soft yellow-white, not bright, not flashing. More like a flashlight wrapped in cloth. I stopped and looked around for someone nearby. Nobody. The shore behind me was empty. The shore ahead had a few cabin lights, but they were too far and too high to be reflecting like that. The glow stayed under the ice. That was the part that made me stand there longer than I should have. It wasn't on top of the snow. It wasn't bouncing across the surface. It seemed to be below the ice, down inside the darker water, but close enough that it lit up the cracks around it. I took 1 step closer, then stopped because the ice gave a low pop under my boot. Not a break, just one of those deep sounds frozen lakes make. Still, it went through my whole body. The glow moved, slowly. It slid beneath the ice from left to right without stirring anything. No water movement, no bubbles, no cracking. It just moved like something was gliding under a pane of frosted glass. I told myself it had to be a fish. Then I realized fish don't glow like lanterns. I started walking again, faster than before. The glow kept pace. Not exactly beside me, but close enough. If I stopped, it stopped a few seconds later. If I moved, it drifted along under the ice at that same slow speed. I looked back toward the town side and almost turned around. Then I noticed something else. The sound of the reservoir had changed. Before, I could hear faint traffic from the highway and wind in the trees. Now everything sounded muffled. My boots still crunched, but even that sounded wrong, like the noise was happening inside a room with thick walls. I pulled my phone out to record it. The screen was black. I held the power button down and nothing happened. Battery dead, I guess, even though it had been at 20% maybe 10 minutes earlier. That was the first time I really felt alone. Not scared like panic yet. More like I had walked too far from the regular world and only noticed after it was too late. I put the phone back in my pocket and kept moving toward the far shore. The glow drifted closer. I could see it better now through one of the bare patches of ice. It looked round at first, but as it moved under clearer ice, the shape changed. It stretched into something longer, then became round again, like I wasn't seeing the thing itself, but light passing through something uneven. The color wasn't quite white either. It had a pale green edge to it. Very faint. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and bounced once on the snow. I didn't pick it up. A few seconds later, I heard a knocking sound from underneath the ice. 3 soft taps, then a pause, then 2 more. I stopped so fast I nearly fell. The glow stopped too. I stood there holding my breath, looking down. The ice beneath my boots looked thick, foggy, full of white lines and trapped air. Then the knocking came again, this time from farther ahead. Tap, tap, tap. It didn't sound like cracking. It sounded deliberate, like someone hitting the underside of a table with one finger. I said, "Hello?" I don't know why. My voice came out flat and tiny. Nothing answered. The glow moved again, but this time it passed in front of me instead of beside me. It crossed my path several yards ahead, then turned slowly back toward the direction I needed to go, like it wanted me to follow. I almost turned around right there, but the town shore looked farther away now than it should have. The trees behind it blended into the dark, and the footprints I'd made seemed faint already, partly covered by wind-blown powder. The far shore had porch lights and cabins and the road up to my brother-in-law's place. So I kept going. I tried not to look at the glow after that, but I kept seeing it from the corner of my eye. It stayed close. Sometimes it sank deeper and became blurry. Sometimes it rose near the surface, and the ice around it lit up enough for me to see long cracks spreading beneath my feet. About halfway across, the wind stopped completely. I noticed because my face suddenly felt warmer. The cold was still there, but the air wasn't moving at all. Even the loose snow on the ice stopped skittering. Then I smelled something strange. Not rotten, not gasoline, more like wet pennies and burned dust. It came in one steady wave and sat there around me. I looked toward the far shore and saw a man standing near the tree line. At least I thought it was a man. He was on the ice, maybe 20 yards from shore, wearing dark clothes, too far away to see his face. He stood perfectly still with his arms at his sides. For a second, I felt relief because it meant I wasn't alone. I raised one hand. He didn't wave back. I called out, "Hey, is the ice okay over there?" He didn't move. The glow under the ice slowed down. The smell got stronger. I started walking toward the shore, but angled away from the man. I didn't like the way he stood there. It was too still, and he wasn't dressed right for the cold. No hat that I could see. No visible breath either, though mine was coming out in thick clouds. When I got closer, I realized he wasn't on the ice. He was standing just beyond the shore in the trees. Except the tree line behind him looked wrong. The trunks near him didn't line up right. There was a darker area behind his body, like the woods had a gap in them where no snow caught the light. I blinked hard, and the shape changed. Not moved, changed. It became just a narrow tree trunk with branches behind it. That made me feel worse. I had been so sure it was a person that my stomach turned when it wasn't. The glow beneath the ice brightened. I looked down, and for 1 second I saw another light farther out behind it. Then another. 3 lights under the ice, spaced apart in a line. All of them moving slowly in my direction. That was when I started jogging. I knew running on ice was stupid, but I couldn't help it. My boots slipped and scraped. The backpack bounced against my shoulders. I kept expecting the ice to crack under me, or for one of those lights to shoot ahead and cut me off. They didn't. They just followed, slow and steady. The knocking came back, louder now, moving beneath me from left to right. Not random. It had rhythm. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. My ears started ringing. A high, thin sound, like an old television turned on in another room. The far shore looked close, then far, then close again. I don't know how else to explain it. I could see the snowbank clearly. Then a moment later, it seemed like I hadn't gained any ground at all. I kept picking a porch light and walking toward it, but The distance didn't shrink the way it should have. I checked my watch. It was an old digital Casio, nothing fancy. The numbers showed 5:28. That made no sense. It had been around 4:45 when I left town. The crossing should have taken maybe 20 minutes, not 40, and it still wasn't over. I looked up again. The cabin lights on shore were gone. Not all lights, just the ones I'd been aiming for. The shore was a dark strip now, trees packed together, snowbanks pale beneath them. I could still see the outline of land, but no houses. No road. No warm windows. The only light came from under the ice. I stopped jogging because I couldn't catch my breath. The ringing in my ears grew louder. My jaw ached. My teeth buzzed like I'd bitten foil. Then the glow moved directly beneath me. I froze. The ice under my boots turned milky white, then pale green, then white again. The light spread around both feet in a wide circle. It was brighter than before, but still soft, like it didn't belong to a bulb or flame. Something shifted under the surface. I couldn't see a body, not clearly. Just a darker shape inside the glow, broad and smooth, passing under the ice. The ice didn't crack. That was almost worse. A thing that size should have pushed water, scraped the underside, made bubbles, anything. It moved without touching the world around it. The smell became so strong my eyes watered. I tried to step away, but my left boot wouldn't lift. I looked down and saw nothing holding it. No crack, no slush, no strap caught on anything. It just would not move. My right boot moved fine. I tugged harder, and the sole made a rubber squeak against the ice. The knocking stopped. Everything stopped. Then I heard my name. Not loud. Not from above. From under the ice. Mark. It sounded like my own voice played through a cheap speaker. I pulled so hard my foot came free and I fell backward onto the ice. Pain shot through my elbow. Groceries shifted in my backpack and something glass broke. I scrambled up, slipped twice, and kept going toward shore without looking down. I don't know how long I moved like that. A minute, maybe 10. The next thing I clearly remembered. I was on my hands and knees in snow near the bank, coughing so hard I thought I might throw up. The reservoir was behind me. The glow was still out there under the ice, several yards away from shore. It sat still now. Watching felt like the wrong word, but that was what it felt like. I got to my feet and stumbled up through the trees toward the road. When I looked back once, the glow faded, abruptly. No dimming, no drifting away, just gone. The wind came back so suddenly that loose snow blew off branches around me. I could hear cars again on the highway. A dog barked somewhere near the cabins. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up. 34% battery. I had 3 missed calls from my sister, which made no sense because she was in Denver and didn't know I'd gone walking. I called her back right there with shaking hands. She answered half asleep and irritated, asking why I'd called her 4 times and said nothing. I told her I hadn't. She said my number had called her at 5:12, 5:19, 5:10, 5:26, and 5:31. Each time she answered, there was only static and what sounded like wind. I looked at my watch. 5:34. It was fully dark now. That was impossible too. The crossing couldn't have taken that long. It should have been maybe 1 hour from leaving town to reaching the cabin, even walking slowly. I followed the road uphill and made it back to the cabin around 6. The first thing I did was lock the door, which felt stupid because whatever had happened was outside on the reservoir, not in the trees. Still, I locked it and pushed one of the kitchen chairs under the handle. Then I turned on every light. My backpack smelled terrible, like metal and lake water. The jar of pasta sauce inside had cracked, but nothing else was wet, and there was no red sauce leaking anywhere. The broken jar was empty, clean inside, like someone had washed it. My left boot had a pale mark across the sole. Not mud, not ice. A chalky white streak that looked burned into the rubber. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the heater click on and off. Around 7, my brother-in-law called. His name was Joel, and he'd been checking the cabin cameras because my sister told him I'd sounded weird. He asked if I'd gone across the reservoir. I said yes. He got quiet, then told me the camera above the garage showed me coming up the road at 5:58, but there was something strange about the footage. I asked what he meant. He said the motion light never came on until I was almost at the porch. That light picked up deer from 30 feet away. But in the video, I walked up the driveway in total darkness until I was almost touching the steps. Then the light clicked on and I appeared all at once, like the camera had missed the first half of me crossing the yard. I told him maybe the camera lagged. He said maybe. Then he asked why I was carrying my backpack in front of me. I looked at the backpack on the floor beside the table. I had no memory of doing that. Joel sent me the clip later, but I only watched it once. The quality wasn't great. Snow blew across the frame. The driveway sat dark, then the porch light snapped on. I was standing there facing the camera, holding the backpack against my chest with both arms. My face looked wrong, not distorted, just blank, like I was listening to someone behind me. Behind me, down through the trees, the frozen reservoir was visible in a thin gray strip. For about 2 seconds, before the clip ended, a soft white glow appeared under the ice near the shore. Then the video cut to black. I rented the cabin in northern Minnesota during the off-season because it was cheap and isolated. It sat beside a narrow lake surrounded by pine trees with only 2 other cabins nearby, both empty that week according to the owner. The place itself was small. 1 bedroom, wood stove, old screened porch facing the water. No cell service unless you drove 10 minutes back toward the highway. I got there on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late October. By midnight, the rain had stopped, but fog rolled in over the lake, thick enough that I couldn't see the opposite shoreline anymore. The temperature dropped hard, too. Every window in the cabin fogged slightly around the edges. I stayed up late reading near the wood stove while wind pushed softly through the trees outside. Nothing strange at first. Around maybe 4 in the morning, I woke suddenly without knowing why. The room looked brighter than before, not daylight bright, just faintly illuminated through the curtains facing the lake. At first, I thought maybe sunrise was starting early through the fog somehow. Then I checked the clock beside the bed. 4:07 a.m. Still completely dark outside. I sat there listening. No wind anymore. No tree movement. The cabin had gone dead quiet except for the occasional creak from cooling wood in the stove. The pale light behind the curtains remained steady. I remember immediately assuming somebody had driven up outside, maybe another renter or the owner checking something unexpectedly. But there was no sound of tires on gravel. No engine. Nothing. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The closer I got, the stranger the light looked through the curtains. Softer somehow, not harsh like headlights. I pulled one side of the curtain back slightly. There was a white glow hanging over the lake, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the water, completely silent. For a second, my brain tried turning it into something normal. Boat light, helicopter, reflection from another cabin. But it didn't fit any of those. The glow stayed perfectly still above the fog-covered lake, and the water beneath it looked wrong. That was the first thing that truly unsettled me. The light barely reflected on the lake surface at all. I could see faint brightness touching the fog around it, but the water below stayed dark except for a weak, blurred patch directly underneath, not even close to how light should have reflected. I stared long enough that my eyes started watering. The glow itself wasn't sharply defined, more like a pale sphere hidden behind mist. Sometimes it looked circular, other times stretched slightly taller. I checked the sky above it. Nothing. No stars visible through the cloud cover. No aircraft lights. I remember whispering, "What are you?" without meaning to. The second I spoke, the glow shifted sideways, very slowly, still silent. The movement made my stomach tighten immediately because it didn't drift naturally like fog or lantern light. It moved with purpose somehow. I backed away from the window, then stopped because something tapped softly against the porch screen outside. One tap, then another. I froze completely. The screened porch wrapped around the front of the cabin facing the lake. To reach it, something would have to cross directly past the windows first. Another soft tap came from outside. Metallic this time, like fingernails against aluminum screen framing. I moved carefully toward the front room without turning lights on. The cabin floor creaked under me louder than usual. When I reached the living room window, I looked through the porch screen toward the lake. The glow remained there. Closer now, maybe. Hard to judge distance over water and darkness. The fog around the lake looked brighter beneath it. Then I noticed something else. The porch floorboards were wet, not from rain leaking in. Individual damp footprints crossed the porch from left to right. I stared at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. bare footprints, human-looking mostly, except oddly long. The toes appeared stretched somehow by water running across the wood grain. They ended near the porch steps leading outside. I remember becoming very aware then that the cabin door behind me was still locked. I checked it immediately anyway. Locked. Windows shut too. The footprints remained outside only. The glow over the lake drifted slightly lower. Then the tapping sound came again from farther down the porch. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. I looked toward the sound and saw movement near the porch corner. Not clearly. Just darker motion against darkness, like someone passing between fog and screen. I stepped backward immediately. The movement stopped. My heart was pounding hard enough I could hear it. I grabbed the fireplace poker from beside the stove, mostly because it was the only thing nearby. The glow outside dimmed slightly. At the same moment, all the sounds around the lake disappeared. I hadn't noticed frogs or insects earlier until they were gone. Even the tiny waves against shore stopped. The silence felt physical. Then came a low hum. Very faint. Not from the cabin, from outside over the lake. The glow brightened again while the humming continued, and suddenly I realized the fog wasn't moving around it naturally. It curled inward slightly toward the light. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it looked like the mist itself was being pulled. The wet footprints on the porch glistened faintly in the pale light. I kept staring at them because it grounded me somehow. They were physical. Real. Then one new footprint appeared near the porch steps. I didn't see something step there. The wet print simply darkened into visibility on the wood. Fresh. I backed into the kitchen immediately after that. Part of me wanted to turn every light on in the cabin. Another part felt terrified to make myself visible through the windows. The humming grew slightly louder. Cabinet glasses rattled softly. The clock on the microwave flickered once and reset to 12. Then everything stopped. The humming vanished. The glow outside remained steady. I forced myself back toward the window again because not looking somehow felt worse. Outside, the lake surface looked perfectly still now. Too still. The pale glow hovered maybe 20 feet above the water near the dock, and beneath it, something dark stood at the shoreline. At first, I thought it was a tree stump. Then the shape moved slightly sideways. Tall, thin, not enough detail to make out more than that. I remember gripping the poker so tightly my hand cramped. The shape remained near the dock facing the cabin. At least it felt like it was facing the cabin. Then the glow shifted upwards slightly, and the dark figure disappeared into the fog completely. Gone instantly. The glow stayed another few seconds. Then it moved out across the lake silently. Not fast, just smooth and level. The strange part was the water beneath it still refused to reflect properly. The lake stayed dark except for that faint blurred patch directly below. Eventually the glow dimmed enough that it blended into the fog entirely. Then nothing remained. No sound. No light. Just dark lake again. I stayed awake until sunrise, sitting in a kitchen chair holding the fireplace poker like an idiot. Every small cabin noise made me jump. Around 6:30, gray daylight finally started filtering through the windows. The lake looked normal again. Fog thinning, cold wind returning through the trees. I convinced myself the footprints on the porch had probably belonged to me somehow from earlier rain. Then I opened the front door. The porch boards were covered in wet footprints. Dozens. They circled the cabin twice, not just the porch, the entire cabin. I followed them around the outside slowly. The prints stayed evenly spaced all the way through wet leaves and mud. Always barefoot, always slightly too long, and they never overlapped my own footprints from arriving earlier. Near the back wall of the cabin, the tracks passed directly beneath the bedroom window where I'd first seen the glow. Then they continued toward the lakeshore. I followed them all the way to the dock. The morning air smelled strongly of wet metal for some reason. The footprints crossed the dock boards clearly, then stopped halfway to the end. Not faded. Stopped. No return prints. Nothing in the water below except dark ripples moving gently against the posts. I stood there staring at the final footprint for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The wood around the last print was still wet, even though the rest of the dock had already started drying in the morning wind. I set up the time-lapse on a Tuesday night in mid-September. Skies were clear, no moon, pretty ideal for stargazing. I was out behind my place in Driftwood, Texas, kind of a scrubby hilltop that backs up to some ranch land. There's not a ton of light pollution if you face away from Austin, and I'd built a little platform out there with a level mount and power for my gear. I'd just gotten a new camera, a ZWO ASI 533, and I wanted to test it on a longer sequence, something like 6 hours. I mounted it on my Skywatcher tracker and pointed it towards Cygnus. I wasn't trying to catch anything in particular, just wanted to see how the noise looked on the sensor over time. Everything was routine. I calibrated the mount, triple-checked polar alignment, locked down the intervalometer to shoot one frame every 15 seconds. Started the sequence at around 8:20 p.m. and left it running through the night. Next morning, I woke up around 6 and went out to bring the gear in. Nothing seemed off. I dumped the images onto my desktop and let them compile into a time-lapse while I made coffee. I wasn't even planning on watching the full thing, just skipping around to check for clouds or motion blur. I started scrubbing through it around 8 a.m., just a standard star field. The Milky Way drifted slowly across the frame, satellites here and there, a couple of faint meteors. But then I noticed something strange. There was a single point of light, bright, steady, not blinking, just above the frame's bottom right corner in the first few minutes. At first, I assumed it was Jupiter or maybe Vega peeking in, but as the frames progressed, that point didn't follow the rest of the sky. Everything else moved left to right, as expected with the Earth's rotation. But this one, it moved the other way. Not fast, really slow. Like, if I hadn't had it sped up 200x, I wouldn't have noticed at all. But frame to frame, it was drifting against the starfield, just a hair at a time. I thought it might be a plane, but it didn't blink. No strobe, no color shift, no tail, and it stayed in frame for almost 40 minutes. That's way too long for a plane, or even a satellite on a weird orbit. I backed up and watched again, slower this time. You could see it make these tiny directional changes, not enough to jump, just a subtle wobble, like it was correcting itself. The path wasn't perfectly smooth. About halfway through the sequence, the object stopped moving entirely, just sat in one spot for maybe 8 minutes. No fade, no blinking, no shift. Then it started drifting again, same speed but at a slightly different angle. I checked the tracking logs from the mount. It was running perfectly. No skips, no errors. If the mount had misaligned or stalled, the whole frame would have shifted. But all the stars stayed solid, which means the tracker was working fine. The rest of the footage was normal. Around 2:10 a.m., the point of light exited the top left of the frame, and that was it. I exported a clip of just that portion around 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and played it again. This time, I noticed something else. At about 12:34 a.m., the object dimmed for a few seconds. Not flickered, dimmed, like someone turned down a dimmer switch and then brought it back up. The background stars didn't change at all, so it wasn't the atmosphere. I froze the frame where it was dimmest. It wasn't totally dark, still faintly visible, but it had dropped way below everything else in the scene. Then it slowly brightened back to its original intensity, steady as before. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. Still just a point. No shape, no halo. Just a pure white pixel. I checked the sky databases next. Starlink paths, ISS passes, Iridium flares. Nothing matched the location or time. It wasn't in any cataloged flight path or satellite log for that night. Then I went back to my raw images, the individual frames. I found the exact ones where the dimming happened and looked closer. Around that time, something strange happened to the image noise. Every photo in the sequence had a little thermal grain, typical for long exposures. But for exactly 3 frames during that dim period, the background noise changed. The stars got fuzzier. Not out of focus, just softer, like the whole scene had been slightly diffused. After those 3 frames, everything snapped back to normal. I thought maybe dew had formed on the lens, but I checked the dew heater logs. Temps were steady, no condensation warnings. Also, the stars were sharp before and after, so it didn't track. I decided to do a screen recording of the whole time-lapse and send it to a friend of mine, Kyle, who does astrophotography out in Arizona. I didn't give him any context, just told him to watch and tell me if he saw anything weird. He called me about 2 hours later and asked, "What the hell is that point of light doing?" So it wasn't just me. We both tried running the footage through different filters, contrast boosts, exposure curves, color isolations. Nothing changed what we were seeing. Still just that white point slowly drifting in the wrong direction, changing course once, dimming briefly, and then exiting frame. We even checked for bugs. Maybe some weird sensor artifact, stuck pixel, something digital, but it changed position, brightness, and path over time. No way it was just a glitch. Out of curiosity, I checked my backup drive. It auto-logs time metadata from the mount and camera. Everything lined up except for one thing. There was a gap in the log between 1:20 and 54 a.m. 46 seconds, just gone. The camera kept shooting through it, and those frames are there, but the control software didn't record any settings or positional data for that window. Like, it just skipped over that period entirely. I hadn't touched anything. I was asleep. I've done maybe 200 overnight sequences out there. That's never happened. I didn't know what else to do with the footage. I didn't want to post it anywhere public. Just kept it on my drive, checked it a few more times over the next week. Every time I came away with the same feeling, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to notice. I haven't caught anything like it since, but I still run the camera a few times a month. Just in case. It was just after 3 a.m. when I pulled into the lot behind the Petro off I-80 in Nebraska. I'd been driving since Des Moines, and my back was screaming. My hours were almost up, and I wasn't about to push it. I parked along the far edge of the lot, away from the other rigs, habit mostly. I like quiet when I sleep. I shut everything down, climbed into the sleeper, and cracked the window a little. There was a breeze, and it helped muffle the noise from the highway. I checked my phone, no messages, nothing missed, and set my alarm for 8. I usually wake up earlier, but I needed the rest. I remember drifting off to the sound of one of those big reefer units cycling on and off a few trucks over. Next thing I knew, I was awake again. No sound, no movement, just wide awake. It was still dark, but lighter than before, early dawn maybe. My clock said 5:24. What actually woke me up was my phone. Not ringing, already lit up, sitting face up on the shelf near my head, like it had just finished doing something. The screen said 1 new voicemail. No missed call, no notification from a number, just the voicemail icon. I sat up and stared at it for a second before picking it up. Checked the call log, nothing. No incoming calls since I'd left Iowa the night before. I tapped into voicemail and put it on speaker. It was just static. No voice, no tones, just that soft, low, crackling white noise. It ran for a few seconds before I heard this faint, weird tapping underneath it. Slow, steady, like something hitting metal, then pausing, then doing it again. I sat there listening, waiting for a voice or some clue, but it never changed. Just static and that tapping. I listened to the whole thing. 3 minutes, 2 seconds, then it ended. I played it again, same exact pattern. After the second time, I downloaded the message and tried to forward it to my buddy Cal, who used to mess with CB recordings and audio stuff. But the file didn't show up. I had the option to share, but when I tried, it said file not available. I went back to the voicemail list, and it was gone. Not deleted. Gone. Like it was never there. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap, trying to talk myself out of being weirded out. I checked my settings, rebooted the phone, went through the call log again. Still nothing. No number. No contact. I didn't go back to sleep. I climbed out of the cab around 6:30 and walked across the lot to the diner. Got coffee, eggs, the usual. Tried not to think about the voicemail. The waitress was chatty, and I let her talk at me for a while just to stay distracted. By the time I got back to my truck, the sun was up, and the lot was busier. I checked the truck, did my walk around, logged in my hours, and tried to settle back into normal. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I turned the key and the radio came on, tuned to AM 530 for some reason. I always keep it on FM or satellite, so that was strange. 530 is usually dead air, but it wasn't. I heard a low hum, like a carrier signal with no voice, just a steady tone. I changed it and moved on. I drove west for most of the day, stopping in Ogallala to refuel. Somewhere between North Platte and Sydney, I started to get this feeling like something was off. The air felt heavy, like pressure in my ears, but not quite, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Around that time, I noticed the CB was acting up. Channel 19 kept breaking in and out like someone was trying to talk, but cutting off before finishing. At first, I figured it was interference, but it wasn't weather. Sky was clear. Then I picked up this really faint signal, someone whispering numbers, one at a time. Long pauses in between. I listened for a couple miles, but it didn't repeat or make any sense. I flipped through channels. Nothing. When I stopped in Cheyenne that night, I checked my phone again. Still no trace of the voicemail. I even called my own number from a landline to check it. Empty. No saved messages. I slept okay that night, in a better lit part of the lot with a few other rigs nearby. But I kept waking up feeling like someone was standing just outside the cab. Every time I looked, no one was there. The next morning, I got a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. It said, that was it. Just the word tap in brackets, spaced like they were trying to match the rhythm. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the thread, and threw the phone on the passenger seat. For the next few days, nothing else happened. No messages, no voicemails, no weird audio. I finished my run and parked the truck at the yard back home. Took a few days off, tried not to think about it. A week later, I was sitting in my kitchen watching a movie on my laptop when I heard that same tapping. Not on the phone, in the house, from somewhere near the laundry room. 3 slow taps, hollow and sharp, like someone knocking gently on metal with a coin. I got up and checked. Nothing there. Back door locked. Washer and dryer off. That night, I turned my phone off completely for the first time in years. I still use the same number. I've never gotten that voicemail again. But sometimes, when I'm parked at some quiet truck stop late at night, the CB will pick up static for a second, and I'll hear 3 faint taps underneath. Then silence. I started noticing it because the dog wouldn't go near that part of the field anymore. My name's Owen. I run a small farm just outside a village, nothing huge, just a few acres, mostly open land with a long stretch of field behind the house. I've been there a few years, same routines every day, so when something changes, it stands out. The first time I saw the glow, I thought it was just headlights from the road cutting across the field at an angle. It was late, around 10:40 p.m. I remember because I just finished locking up the shed and was heading back toward the house. The sky was clear, cold enough that the ground felt firm underfoot. I glanced out over the field and saw this faint patch of light, low to the ground, not bright, just enough to notice. It covered maybe a circle 10, 15 feet across, somewhere near the far end of the field. I stopped walking and stared at it, tried to figure out the angle. There's a road a good distance behind that part of the property, but the light didn't line up with it, and it wasn't moving. If it were headlights, it should have shifted. Instead, it stayed fixed in place. I took a few steps toward it. As soon as I did, the glow faded. Not instantly, just dimmed until it was gone. The field went back to looking the way it always did at night, flat and dark. I stood there for a bit, thinking maybe it had just been my eyes adjusting. Then I shrugged it off and went inside. But the next night, it happened again, same time. I was out a little earlier, feeding the dog and checking the fence line. I wasn't even thinking about the night before. Then I saw it. Same spot. Same faint glow. Again, it looked like it was sitting just above the ground, not lighting up the area around it, just existing there. I stopped immediately this time. Didn't move toward it right away, just watched. It didn't flicker, didn't change shape, just a steady, pale light. The dog was with me then, a collie named Jess. She saw it too. I could tell from the way she stiffened, ears forward, body tense, but she didn't bark, didn't move toward it either, just stood there, staring. I took a slow step forward. Jess stayed where she was. The glow faded again. Same as before, gradual, gone within a few seconds. I walked out to where it had been. The ground looked normal, no marks, no heat, no change in the grass. I crouched down and touched the soil, cold, same as everywhere else. I stood up and looked around, trying to find any explanation. There wasn't one. After that, I started paying attention to the time. It was always around 10:40, give or take a minute, and it didn't happen every night, but often enough that I couldn't ignore it. Maybe 4 or 5 times a week. Always the same patch, always the same size, always fading by the time I got close. Jess stopped going near that part of the field altogether. Even during the day, she'd skirt around it. Not a big wide circle, just enough that it stood out. Animals usually get over things quickly. She didn't. A couple nights later, I decided to get out there earlier. I set an alarm for 10:30, went outside and waited. Cold night again, clear sky, no wind. Jess stayed near the house, watching me, but not coming out. I stood there facing the field, arms crossed, just waiting. 10:38. Nothing. Still nothing. Then at around 10:40 it appeared. No buildup, no gradual brightening. It was just there, that same faint glow like a soft light pressed against the ground. I didn't move this time. I stayed where I was and watched it. It held steady, didn't react to me standing there, didn't shift or change. I took a small step forward. It didn't fade immediately this time. It stayed. That was new. I took another step. Still there. Jess whined softly from behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the glow. Another step. Now I was maybe halfway across the field. The glow started to dim. Slowly. I stopped walking. It held for a second like it was deciding something. Then it faded again. Gone. I walked the rest of the way to the spot, same as before. Nothing unusual. No warmth. No mark in the grass. Just the same patch of ground. I stood there longer than usual, trying to see if it would come back. It didn't. I went back inside after that. But the next time it happened, something was different. It was a foggy night. Not thick, just a low mist hanging over the field. I almost didn't go out, but I checked the time and figured I'd at least look. When I stepped outside, I saw the glow right away. It was brighter this time. Not by a lot, but enough that it stood out more clearly through the fog. And the fog around it behaved strangely. It didn't scatter the light. It didn't glow the way fog usually does when light hits it. Instead, it seemed to bend around the glow, like it was avoiding it. I walked out again, slower this time. Jess didn't come with me. I could hear her pacing near the back door. The glow stayed steady as I approached. The fog shifted slightly with the breeze, but not over that spot. It parted around it. I stopped maybe 20 feet away, closer than I'd been before. The glow didn't fade right away. It stayed, longer than usual. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there, like the air had thickened. I took one more step. The glow dimmed, then faded out, leaving the fog to settle back into place. I stood there, listening. Nothing, no sound, no movement, just the quiet of the field. I walked back to the house slowly. Jess met me at the door but didn't step past it. I looked back over my shoulder once. The field was dark again, normal. But the part that keeps getting to me isn't just that it appears at the same time or that it fades when I get close. It's that it seems to wait. Like it knows when I'm watching. And the closer I get, the longer it stays until there's a point where it decides that's enough and disappears, leaving nothing behind except the same piece of ground that my dog still refuses to walk across, even in the middle of the day. I was already set up when I saw it. My name's Callum. I do landscape photography, nothing professional, just something I've stuck with for years. I like going out early, before sunrise, catching that quiet light before everything wakes up. That morning I'd driven out to a stretch of moorland about 40 minutes from my house. It's mostly flat with a few low ridges, open in every direction. No buildings for miles, just fields, fences, and the occasional cluster of trees. I got there around 4:20 a.m. Still dark. Not pitch black. There was that faint hint of light on the horizon, but the stars were still visible. It was cold too. Not freezing, but enough that I kept my jacket zipped up and my hands tucked in when I wasn't adjusting the camera. I set up near a fence line overlooking a wide valley. I'd been there before, knew roughly where the sun would come up. Tripod down, camera mounted, settings dialed in. I was taking a few test shots, checking exposure, framing things up. Everything felt normal. Quiet. A little breeze moving across the grass. Nothing unusual. I remember glancing at the time, 4:37. Still had a bit before any real light. I stepped back from the camera and just stood there for a minute, looking out across the valley. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A faint vertical line of light in the distance. Miles away, straight ahead, slightly to the left. It was subtle, not bright like a beam, more like a pale column, barely visible against the dark. I blinked, focused on it. It stayed, perfectly straight, extending from the ground up into the clouds. I stepped closer to the tripod instinctively, looked through the camera's viewfinder. I couldn't see it there, just the normal landscape. I pulled back, looked with my eyes again. There it was. Same place, same shape. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was some kind of light from the ground, maybe a vehicle. But it didn't spread, didn't fan out like headlights. It was too narrow, too clean, and it went straight up into the clouds, which were thin and high, barely visible otherwise. The column didn't illuminate the clouds. It just continued into them, like it didn't stop. I stood there, watching it, trying to see if it moved. It didn't. No sway, no flicker, just a steady, faint presence. I glanced around the rest of the landscape. Nothing else looked unusual. No other lights, no movement. Just that one column. The breeze seemed to die down. I noticed it because the grass stopped moving. Everything went still. I shifted my weight slightly, feeling the cold more now. Then I realized something else. There were no sounds. No birds, no distant cars, nothing, just silence. I looked back at the column. It was still there. I raised my phone and tried to take a picture. Pointed it straight at it, took a few shots, checked the screen, nothing, just the normal horizon. I lowered the phone slowly, looked up again. The column hadn't changed. I could feel that pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like being in an airplane during descent. I swallowed. It lingered. I kept watching. I don't know how long. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt longer, like time stretched slightly. Then, without warning, it dimmed, not faded, just reduced, like someone turning down a light. And then it was gone. Completely. No trace. The horizon looked exactly like it had before. Dark, flat, empty. The clouds above showed nothing, no residual glow, no disturbance. I stood there, staring at the spot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The breeze came back. I could hear it moving through the grass again. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The normal sounds returned. The pressure in my ears eased. I checked my phone again. The time didn't match what I expected. It was 4:44. I remember that clearly. 7 minutes had passed, but it hadn't felt like that, not even close. I went back through the photos I'd taken, the test shots before, the ones during. Nothing. No column, no light, just the landscape. I even zoomed in on the area where I'd seen it. Nothing out of place. I stood there for a while longer, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. The sky gradually brightened as the sun approached. Everything looked normal. By the time the first real light hit the valley, it felt like any other morning. I packed up slowly, kept looking back toward that spot. Nothing, just fields and low hills. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how clean it had been, how precise. A straight column of light stretching from the ground into the clouds, perfectly still, and how it had only been visible to me, not the camera, not the phone, just my eyes. I've been back to that spot a few times since. Same time, same setup, same conditions, as close as I can get. I haven't seen it again, but every time I stand there before sunrise, looking out over that valley, I find myself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see that faint line again, rising straight up, quiet, and gone before I can prove it was ever there. I was parked outside the north checkpoint a little after midnight, engine off, paperwork on the dash, just waiting for clearance to bring the tanker through. My name's Daniel Rios. I'd been hauling aviation fuel out to that base twice a week for almost a year. Most nights were boring. You sat there, watched the desert, tried not to fall asleep. It was late August, still hot even at night. The kind of heat that clings to the asphalt and makes everything smell like rubber and dust. No wind. No clouds. The sky was clear enough that the stars looked sharp. I remember because I was staring at them when I noticed something off near one of the distant hangars. From where I waited, you could see the outer row of buildings if you looked past the fence line and over the low rise. Most of the hangars sat dark at that hour. Every now and then you'd see headlights move or a door crack open, but that night it was quiet. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The air above one hangar looked like it was wavering, like heat rising off a highway in the middle of summer. But it wasn't the ground doing it. It was higher up, maybe 50 feet above the roof. I blinked a few times, took off my glasses and wiped them on my shirt. When I looked again, it was still there. It wasn't a glow. There weren't any lights. It was just a distortion. The stars directly above that hangar looked slightly bent, like you were looking at them through moving water. The outline of the building beneath it seemed softer too, almost blurred. I told myself it had to be heat coming off the roof. Maybe some kind of venting system. but it didn't look random. The distortion had edges. Not sharp edges exactly, but boundaries, like something large was sitting there, and the air around it was warping. I leaned forward in the cab and turned off the radio completely. I wanted to hear if there was anything, engines, rotors, anything at all. Nothing. The desert was dead quiet. I checked my phone for the time, 12:17 a.m. I remember that specifically because I considered texting my buddy Marco, who used to run this route before me, just to say, "You ever see anything weird out here?" But I didn't. It felt stupid. The distortion seemed to deepen. The air above the hangar shimmered harder, like when you open an oven door and that blast of heat hits you. The stars behind it bent more noticeably now, and the shape, if that's what it was, felt wider than the building itself. Still no sound. I stepped out of the truck. The heat from the day was still radiating up from the pavement. My boots made that soft crunch on gravel as I moved closer to the fence line, though I stayed well back from it. There were cameras everywhere. The last thing I needed was a guard thinking I was wandering around. From outside the cab, it was even clearer. It looked like a massive, invisible thing was parked above that hangar. Not floating high, just resting there, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the roof. The air around it rippled in layers. I could trace a rough curve along the top where the distortion seemed strongest. I tried to convince myself it was just thermal exhaust. Maybe something inside was venting hot air upward. But if that were true, there would have been steam, smoke, something visible. There was nothing. And then I noticed something else. The lights around that hangar, the small security floods mounted along the walls, looked dimmer than the rest. Not off, just slightly muted, like someone had turned them down. I checked the other buildings. Their lights looked normal. I started to feel this pressure in my chest. Not pain, just this heavy awareness that I was watching something I wasn't supposed to be seeing. My phone buzzed in my hand. It made me flinch so hard I almost dropped it. It was just the dispatcher updating my wait time. 15 more minutes. When I looked back up, the distortion had changed. It wasn't as intense. It was shrinking, pulling inward toward the center point above the hangar. The air around it smoothed out gradually, like ripples settling on a pond. Still no sound, no sudden movement, just that shimmer fading. And right as the last of it disappeared, the hangar doors began to close. They hadn't been opened before. I was sure of that. I'd been looking at that building for at least 10 minutes. The doors had been sealed shut. Now they were sliding together slowly, the heavy metal panels meeting in the middle. No bright lights spilled out, no silhouettes, just darkness behind them. Once the doors sealed, the building looked completely normal. The lights along the walls brightened back to match the others. That was it. No roar of engines, no aircraft taking off, no vehicles moving in or out, just silence. I stood there for a while, waiting for something else to happen. I kept expecting to hear a delayed boom, see something shoot up into the sky. Nothing did. When clearance finally came through, I climbed back into the truck. My hands were shaking more than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was just the heat. As I rolled through the checkpoint, one of the guards, a guy I'd seen plenty of times before, name patch said Henderson, gave me this long look. Not suspicious, just measured. I almost asked him. Almost said, "Hey, what was that above hangar 4?" But I didn't know the hangar numbers for sure, and something about the way he was watching me made me keep my mouth shut. Inside the base, everything looked routine. A few trucks moving around, some distant headlights, the same quiet industrial hum as always. While I was hooking up the hose to offload the fuel, I glanced toward that hangar again. From this angle, it looked completely ordinary. Solid. Still. But I noticed the concrete around it looked darker than the rest, like it had been recently washed or sprayed down. I finished the delivery and left without saying anything to anyone. On the drive back down the highway, I kept checking my mirrors, not because I thought something was following me exactly. It was more like I felt exposed. About 20 miles out, my dashboard clock flickered. It blinked off for maybe a second, then came back on. I figured it was just a loose wire. The truck was old, but the time read 12:46 a.m. That didn't make sense. I knew I'd left the base around 12:35 at the latest. The drive to where I was should have taken 15 minutes, minimum. I checked my phone, 12:53 a.m., 7 minutes difference. I pulled over on the shoulder and just sat there with the engine idling. I tried to retrace the drive in my head. The checkpoint, the straight stretch past the hills, the dry lake bed on the right. I couldn't remember passing the lake bed. It was like that section of road just wasn't there in my memory. I told myself I'd zoned out. It happens on long desert drives at night. You slip into autopilot. I restarted the truck to reset the clock. It synced back up with my phone. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio off. I didn't tell Marco. Didn't tell my wife either. What would I even say? I saw invisible heat above a hangar and maybe lost a few minutes. But the next time I had that route 2 weeks later, I checked that same hangar. Different night, cooler weather, a little wind, nothing unusual. Still, I didn't park facing it anymore while I waited. I turned the truck the other direction toward the open desert and kept my eyes on the road instead. I only called it out because it wasn't drifting. My name's Aaron Pike. I was a radar trainee at the time, fresh out of school, still learning the systems. This was at a small airfield out in eastern Oregon. Nothing major, just a mix of civilian and occasional military traffic. Quiet most nights. I was on an overnight shift with a supervisor named Greg Dalton. He'd been doing it for years, the kind of guy who barely looked at the screens unless something was actually wrong. Most of the time, nothing was. It was around 3:10 in the morning. Cold night, clear sky, no flight scheduled for at least another hour. I was just running routine sweeps, watching the returns scroll across the display. Ground clutter, distant weather echoes, the usual noise. Then, something new appeared. At first, I thought it was just a ghost return. Happens sometimes, equipment hiccups, stray reflections, stuff like that. But this one was clean, a solid circular return. Right above the runway, low altitude. Maybe a couple 100 feet if the readout was right. I leaned in, adjusting the gain slightly. The circle stayed perfectly defined, no distortion, no flicker, just sitting there. I checked the wind data out of habit. Light breeze from the west, not strong enough to matter much, but the return didn't move at all. No drift, no wobble, nothing, just fixed in place. I watched it for a few seconds, expecting it to fade. It didn't. I glanced over at Greg. He was looking down at some paperwork, not paying attention. I turned back to the screen. The return was still there. Same size, same position. I switched to a different display mode, same thing. It showed up across all the systems. Consistent. That's when I felt that slight shift in my gut, because glitches don't usually stay that stable. I picked up the mic. Greg, you seeing this? He looked up slowly. Seeing what? I pointed at the screen. Low altitude return over runway 2. He stood up, walked over, looked at the display, didn't say anything right away, just watched it. We stood there for maybe 10 seconds. The return didn't change, didn't move, didn't fade, just held its position. You got anything scheduled? I asked. He shook his head. No. Helicopter maybe? No call-in. I checked the transponder data. Nothing. No signal. No ID. Just the raw return. Wind's not touching it, I said quietly. Greg nodded once. Still watching. Another 10 seconds passed. The return stayed exactly where it was. Same shape, same intensity. Like it was locked to that point in space. Call it out, I said, half expecting him to take over. Instead, he looked at me. You're the trainee. I hesitated. Then keyed the mic. The unidentified low-altitude return over runway 2. No transponder, no drift. Confirming visual unavailable. I released the button. The room went quiet again. Greg didn't respond right away. He just kept looking at the screen. Then he reached over and tapped the console lightly. Try recalibrating, he said. I blinked. What? System might be off, he said calmly. Run a quick recalibration. I looked back at the return. Still there. Still perfectly still. That's not a calibration issue, I said. Greg didn't argue. He just said, do it anyway. Something in his tone made me stop pushing. I pulled up the calibration menu, started the process. The system ran through its checks. Signal strength, alignment, noise filtering. Everything came back normal, no errors. I switched back to the main display. The return was still there, same position, same shape. I looked at Greg. He was already watching me. Again, he said. I hesitated. Then ran it a second time. Same results. No change. When I came back to the display again, the return was gone. Just empty space over the runway. No fade, no movement, just not there anymore. I stared at the screen, scrolled back through the recent data. The return had been there for about 28 seconds. then it vanished between one sweep and the next. I looked at Greg. He didn't look surprised, he just nodded slightly. Log it as calibration artifact, he said. I didn't move. That wasn't an artifact. He met my eyes. Log it, he repeated. There wasn't much I could say after that. I entered it into the system. Kept the description simple, short, nothing extra. The rest of the shift went on like nothing had happened. No more anomalies, no strange returns, just the usual quiet. Before we wrapped up, I checked the logs again, scrolled back to that time. The entry was still there, but something was off. The duration was shorter, about 10 seconds instead of 28. I checked my handwritten notes. They didn't match. I pulled up the raw data. Same thing. Shorter duration, less defined, like it had been smoothed out. I didn't say anything. Just closed the window. When I got home later that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way it stayed perfectly still, no drift, no movement with the wind, no transponder, nothing to identify it, just a clean circular return sitting above the runway like it belonged there. And the way Greg reacted, not surprised, not curious, just done with it. I worked there a few more months after that, never saw anything quite like it again. But every now and then, during those quiet early hours, I'd catch myself watching that same section of airspace, half expecting that shape to reappear, just hovering there, unmoving, unaffected by anything around it. And if it did, I had a feeling I'd be told the same thing again. Recalibrate the system, write it off, and move on, like whatever showed up there wasn't something we were supposed to look at too closely or for too long. I woke up because of the light. At first, I thought it was morning, like the sun had come up early and was hitting the inside of the tent weird. But it wasn't that kind of light. It was too focused. It was coming from my flashlight. It was sitting on the floor of the tent, pointing up at the ceiling, fully on. I didn't move right away. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of it. I knew for a fact the batteries were dead. Not low, not almost dead. Dead. I'd tried to use it the night before when I was setting up, and it barely flickered before cutting out. I remember tapping it against my hand, unscrewing the cap, tightening it again. Nothing. So I'd tossed it into the corner and used my headlamp instead. Now it was on. Bright, steady. No flicker. I pushed myself up slowly on my elbows. The tent felt warm. Warmer than it should have been for that time of night. It had dropped pretty cold after sunset, enough that I'd zipped the sleeping bag all the way up. Now the air felt off. Still, I reached over and grabbed the flashlight. It felt slightly warm in my hand. Not hot, just like it had been on for a while. I turned it off. It clicked normally. I hesitated, then turned it back on. Same brightness, no dimming. I sat there for a second, holding it, my brain trying to catch up. Then I noticed the sound. It was faint, so faint I almost missed it. A low humming coming from outside the tent. Not mechanical, not like a generator or anything I'd heard before. More like a tone. Steady, but not perfectly flat. There was a slight rise and fall to it, like it was breathing in a way. I froze, listening. The woods had gone quiet, completely quiet. No insects, no wind, no leaves moving, nothing but that hum. I checked my phone. 2:18 a.m., no signal, but that was normal out there. I was camped off a trail about 10 miles from the nearest road, up in a patch of forest that didn't get much traffic. I'd picked it because it was quiet. Now it was too quiet. The humming seemed to shift slightly. Not louder, just closer, or maybe more focused. I couldn't tell. I turned the flashlight off again and set it down. The inside of the tent went dark, except for a faint glow leaking through the fabric from outside. That's when I noticed it. The tent walls weren't as dark as they should have been. There was a very soft light outside. Not bright enough to see clearly through the fabric, but enough to outline shapes. I could see the vague silhouette of my pack leaning against the tent wall, the curve of the zipper, my boots near the entrance, all faintly visible. I held still, listening. The hum didn't change, didn't get louder or quieter. It just stayed there, present. I reached up slowly and unzipped the tent a few inches. The zipper sounded too loud in the silence, like it echoed. I stopped halfway, waited. The humming didn't react. I opened it a little more, just enough to look out. The forest looked wrong. That's the best way I can describe it. Not dramatically different, just slightly off. The light outside wasn't coming from a clear source. It wasn't like moonlight. It didn't cast shadows in the usual way. Everything looked evenly lit, but dim. The trees were visible, but their edges felt softer than they should have been, like the contrast had been turned down. I pushed the flap open a bit more. Looked around. The clearing I'd set up in was small, surrounded by tall trees. Normally, you'd see patches of sky through the branches. Now it was just gray, not clouded, just a uniform, dim tone. The humming shifted again. This time I felt it, not just heard it. A slight vibration in my chest. Barely noticeable, but there. I swallowed. The air outside felt warmer than it should have been. Same as inside the tent. I stepped out slowly. Barefoot on the ground, the dirt felt warm too. Not hot, just not cold. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust. The light didn't change, didn't get brighter or darker. It just stayed constant. I looked up. The sky didn't look like sky. No stars, no clear clouds, just that same dim, even glow, like a ceiling. I felt my stomach tighten. The humming deepened slightly, just enough to notice. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing stood out, but there was a feeling like something was there. Not close enough to see, but present, watching. I took a few steps away from the tent. The ground felt the same everywhere, warm, soft. The hum seemed to follow me, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. There was no direction to it. It was just everywhere. I stopped near the edge of the clearing, looked into the trees. The darkness between them seemed thicker, not darker, just denser, like it had weight. For a second, I thought I saw something shift, a slight movement between two trunks, but when I focused on it, there was nothing, just the same dim light, same stillness. I realized I was holding my breath again. I forced myself to inhale. The air felt normal, no smell change, just that warmth. I backed up slowly toward the tent. Didn't want to turn my back on the trees, didn't know why. The hum stayed steady, didn't rise or fall. I reached the tent, crouched down, and slipped back inside. Zipped it closed. The sound of the zipper felt too loud again. I grabbed the flashlight, turned it on. Still bright, still steady. I sat there, listening, watching the tent walls. The faint light outside didn't change. The hum didn't stop. Time stretched again. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been longer. At some point, the humming started to fade, very slowly, like it was pulling away. The vibration in my chest eased. The light outside dimmed, not all at once, gradually, until the tent walls went dark again. I waited. Didn't move, didn't even shift position. Eventually, the normal sounds came back. A single insect at first, then another, then the faint rustle of leaves, the usual background noise of the woods. I checked my phone again, 2:24 a.m. 6 minutes had passed. It didn't feel like 6 minutes. I stayed awake for a while after that. Didn't sleep much. When morning came, everything looked normal. Cold ground, clear sky, sunlight filtering through the trees the way it should. I packed up slowly, kept looking around the clearing. There was no sign anything had happened. No marks, no disturbed ground, nothing out of place. The flashlight was still working. Same brightness, same steady beam. I unscrewed the cap and checked the batteries, same ones I'd put in days before. No reason they should have come back to life. I tried to think of something that made sense. Loose connection, temperature change, something simple. But that didn't explain the light outside, or the humming, or the way the forest had gone completely silent. I left that morning and didn't go back to that spot. Not because of anything specific, just didn't feel right. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just waking up to the flashlight, it was the feeling that whatever had been out there hadn't turned it on by accident. It had done it while I was asleep, and left it pointing straight up, like it wanted the light inside the tent before it moved on. I noticed the window before I even fully woke up. Something about the light in the room felt off. Not brighter, not darker, just different. Like it had been filtered through something. I was still lying there, half asleep, staring toward the wall, when I realized I could hear my own breathing too clearly. No cars outside, no wind, no usual background noise, just me. That's what made me turn my head toward the window. The entire pane was fogged over, not the inside, the outside. Condensation thick enough that it looked almost white in places, like frost but wetter. That part alone didn't make sense. It wasn't cold enough for that. And it definitely hadn't been humid when I went to bed. I pushed myself up on one elbow, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw the clear patch, right in the center of the window, perfectly oval. Not wiped away like someone dragged a hand across it. Not streaked, just clear. Like the condensation had never formed there at all. I sat up fully then. My name's Darren Pike. I live in a small house on the edge of a wooded area. Nothing isolated, but not packed in either. My bedroom window faces the backyard, which backs up to a line of trees. I remember looking at that oval spot and thinking it looked wrong. Not just because it was clear, because of the shape. It wasn't random. It was centered at about head height if someone had been standing outside. And it was just big enough that you could imagine something looking through it. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up slowly. The floor creaked under me. That sound felt louder than it should have. I stepped closer to the window. The rest of the glass was still covered in that thin layer of moisture, tiny droplets clinging evenly across the surface, except for that one spot. I leaned in close enough that I could see into the yard. It was still dark out. Early morning, just before sunrise. The trees were barely visible shapes against the sky. Nothing moving. No one out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted something. Like I hadn't just woken up on my own. Like something had already been there. I reached out and touched the glass near the edge of the clear patch. Cold. Colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that sinks into your fingertip. I moved my hand toward the center of the clear area. The temperature didn't change. Still cold, but there was no moisture, no film, nothing. Just dry glass. I pressed my palm flat against it, half expecting something on the other side to respond. Nothing did. I stood there like that for a few seconds, just listening. Still no sound. No birds, no distant traffic, nothing. I pulled my hand back and wiped a small section of the fogged glass with my sleeve. It smeared immediately, left streaks. Nothing like the clean, untouched patch in the center. I stepped back a bit, trying to see the whole thing at once. The oval looked even more defined from a distance, almost like it had a boundary. Not a hard line, but enough that your eye could follow it. I glanced down at the ground outside. The grass near the window looked darker than the rest of the yard, like it was damp, but everything else was dry. I leaned closer again, squinting. For a second, I thought I saw something in the reflection. Not outside, on the glass itself. A faint distortion, like the shape of something that had been pressed close to it. I blinked. It was gone, just the clear patch and the fog around it. I turned and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. The screen lit up. 4:12 a.m., earlier than I usually wake up. I went back to the window and took a picture. The camera picked it up. The oval was visible in the photo, clear as it was in real life. I zoomed in on the image. The edges looked too smooth, too even. Like it wasn't just a gap in condensation, like something had defined that space. I lowered the phone and looked outside again. The sky was starting to lighten slightly, just enough that I could make out more detail in the yard. Still nothing there. No movement, no sign that anything had been near the window, but the grass right below it still looked darker. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The air hit me immediately. Cold, colder than inside. I walked over to the spot beneath the window. The grass was damp, not soaked, just enough that it clung slightly to my shoes. I crouched down and touched it. Cool. Normal. I looked for footprints. There weren't any. Not that I could see. Just flattened blades of grass in a rough oval shape directly below the window, like something had been standing there, or hovering just above it. I straightened up slowly and looked back at the glass from outside. The oval was still there, clear against the fogged surface. From this angle, it lined up exactly with where my head would be if I were standing there. Looking in, I felt that slow, creeping unease settle in again. Not panic, just the realization that something about this didn't line up with anything normal. I stepped back, giving myself some distance. The rest of the house looked quiet. No lights on, no movement. I went back inside and closed the door. Locked it. When I returned to the bedroom, the window looked exactly the same. Condensation everywhere except that one spot. I stood there for a while just watching it, waiting for something to change. It didn't. Eventually, as the sun came up, the condensation started to fade. Slowly at first, then faster as the glass warmed. Within maybe 20 minutes, the entire window was clear again. No trace of the oval, no streaks, no marks, just normal glass. If I hadn't taken the photo, I would have thought I imagined it. But the picture's still on my phone. And every now and then, when I wake up earlier than usual, I find myself looking at that window first before anything else, just to see if that clear patch shows up again, exactly where something would need it, if it was standing there, quiet, close, watching in. The request came in on a rainy Wednesday morning, just after the library opened. I worked as the local history librarian in a small coastal town in Oregon called Harbor Point. Most of my job involved helping people dig through old records, newspaper archives, property maps, and genealogy documents. The library itself sat on a hill overlooking the harbor. It was an older building with creaky floors, narrow aisles, and a basement archive room that smelled permanently of dust and cardboard. We got unusual requests all the time. People researching family histories, writers looking for obscure details, retired locals chasing old memories. Nothing about the email initially stood out. The subject line simply read, "Archive request." The message itself was short. Very short. The sender wanted a copy of the Harbor Point Gazette dated August 14th, 1968. That wasn't unusual either, until I checked the archive catalog. According to our records, that issue didn't exist, or more accurately, it wasn't supposed to exist. The catalog listed August 13th, then August 15th, nothing in between. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. Old records were messy. I replied and asked for clarification. No response. A few hours later, curiosity got the better of me. I headed downstairs. The archive basement was quiet except for the hum of dehumidifiers. Most of the newspaper collection existed on microfilm reels stored inside metal cabinets. I checked the catalog again. No August 14th. Still, something bothered me. The date seemed too specific. So I started digging. About 20 minutes later, I found an old handwritten note attached to a filing drawer. The note looked decades old. Yellowed paper. Faded ink. 3 words. Destroyed. Flood. That made sense. The library had suffered basement flooding in the early 70s. Many records had been damaged. Problem solved, or so I thought. Then I found the reel. It wasn't where it should have been. It sat in a completely different cabinet behind unrelated materials. The label read, Gazette, Aug 1968. No indication anything was missing. I loaded the reel into a reader. The film started normally, August 1st, August 2, August 3. Everything appeared intact. Then I reached August 13th. The next frame should have been August 15th. Instead, August 14th appeared. The supposedly destroyed issue. I remember staring at it for several seconds. The date was clearly visible, August 14th, 1968. The front page headline wasn't about politics or local news. It described unusual lights seen offshore, multiple witnesses, fishing crews, harbor workers, residents. The article wasn't sensational, just factual, yet something about it felt strange. The story occupied almost the entire front page. I kept reading. Several people reported bright lights hovering above the water during heavy fog. No explanation was offered. I copied a few notes for myself. Then the microfilm machine suddenly shut off. The screen went dark. The room became quiet. I assumed the bulb had failed. After a few seconds, the machine restarted on its own. When the image returned, the August 14th issue was gone. The reel now jumped directly from August 13th to August 15th. I rewound, checked again. No August 14th. I sat there confused. Maybe I'd loaded the reel incorrectly. Maybe I imagined it. That sounds ridiculous, but that was honestly my first thought. I spent another 30 minutes checking. Nothing. The issue had vanished. Eventually I went upstairs and forgot about it, at least for the rest of the day. The requester never replied. No follow-up email. No phone call. Nothing. Thursday morning brought heavy fog. The kind that rolled in from the ocean and swallowed half the town. Visibility dropped to maybe 100 feet. The library felt unusually quiet. Around noon, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Nothing particularly suspicious, just unusual. Most vehicles in town were pickups or SUVs. The sedan remained there all afternoon. Same position. Engine off, dark windows. I mentioned it to my coworker Sarah. She glanced outside. Maybe somebody's waiting for someone. Reasonable enough. Around 4 o'clock, the sedan disappeared. I didn't see it leave. It was simply gone. The next morning, the 2 men arrived. Dark suits, dark ties, polished shoes, one tall, one shorter, both looked completely out of place. The shorter man approached the information desk. His smile appeared friendly enough. "We're hoping you can assist us with archive inquiries." I assumed they were researchers, maybe historians, maybe journalists. What are you looking for? The shorter man exchanged a glance with the taller one. Then he asked, has anyone recently requested the August 14, 1968 edition of the Gazette? The question hit me immediately. My stomach tightened. Why? The taller man opened a notebook. The shorter one smiled again. Routine records verification. The answer sounded rehearsed. I hesitated, then told them the truth. One person requested it by email. The taller man wrote something down. The shorter man nodded. Did anyone else request the same issue? No. The reaction was immediate. Both men visibly relaxed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice, like a weight had been lifted. The taller man stopped writing. The shorter one exhaled quietly. Relief. Genuine relief. That bothered me more than the question itself. I asked who they worked for. The shorter man answered, historical preservation. Another vague answer. Another title that sounded almost real without actually meaning anything. The conversation continued. Had the requester visited in person? No. Had anyone viewed related materials? No. Had copies been made? No. Each answer seemed to make them happier. The taller man eventually closed the notebook. Then came a question I wasn't expecting. Did you locate the issue? I stared at him. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded, briefly. The two men exchanged another look. Not relief this time. Concern. The shorter man leaned forward slightly. You viewed it? Yes. How much? Most of the front page. The taller man's pen stopped moving. The shorter man's smile faded. Not completely. Just enough. What did you observe? Observe. Not read. Observe. The wording felt strange. I described the article. Lights offshore, witness reports, fog, nothing remarkable. The two men listened carefully. When I finished, the shorter man asked, did you view any photographs? I thought about it. No. That answer relaxed them again. The taller man resumed writing. The shorter one nodded slowly. Then he asked something that made no sense. Did the article appear complete? What? The text. I think so. You believe so? Yeah. He seemed satisfied. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, the taller man suddenly asked, how old is the microfilm reader? I blinked. I don't know. Approximate age? Maybe 15 years? He wrote that down too. Then they requested access to the archive room. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We headed downstairs. The entire walk felt uncomfortable. Neither man spoke, neither looked at books or displays. Their attention remained fixed on the archive room. Once inside, they moved directly toward the correct cabinet. No hesitation, no searching, straight to it. That bothered me. The archive layout wasn't public. Visitors couldn't access the basement alone, yet both men walked as though they'd been there before. The taller man opened the cabinet, pulled out the exact reel. First try, no checking labels, no scanning shelves, just reached for it. I watched him carefully. The shorter man noticed. Something wrong? I shrugged. No. The lie sounded weak. The taller man loaded the reel into the reader. The machine powered on. The film rolled. August 13th, August 15th, no August 14th. Nothing unusual. The two men watched quietly. Then the shorter man smiled. There appears to be no issue. The wording felt deliberate. No issue. Not no newspaper. No issue. The double meaning wasn't lost on me. The taller man removed the reel, returned it to the cabinet. Then both men stood silently for several seconds, almost as if waiting. For what, I couldn't tell. Finally, they thanked me for my assistance. We walked upstairs. The shorter man paused near the exit. One final question. Have you discussed the missing edition with anyone? No. Again, relief. The answer clearly mattered. The shorter man nodded. Excellent. Then both men left. I watched through the front windows. The black sedan waited at the curb. No visible license plate, no dealership logo, no manufacturer emblem, nothing. The men got inside. The vehicle drove away. That evening I stayed late, mostly because curiosity refused to leave me alone. After closing, I returned to the basement. I wanted to see the reel again. The cabinet stood exactly where it always had. I opened the drawer. The reel was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. I checked every shelf, every cabinet, nothing. The archive catalog still listed it. The physical reel had vanished. I searched for over an hour. No luck. Eventually I gave up. The next morning I arrived early. The reel sat exactly where it belonged. Same cabinet, same label, like it had never left. I loaded it into the reader immediately. The film rolled. August 13th, August 14th. There it was again. The missing issue. The article remained. So did the photographs. Three grainy black and white images. I hadn't seen them before. The first showed lights over the water. The second showed several witnesses standing on a dock. The third stopped me cold. The image showed the library, not the modern library, the old library building that occupied the site before the current one was built. Standing near the entrance were two men in dark suits. The photograph had been taken in 1968, yet the men looked exactly like the two who had visited me. Same faces, same expressions, same clothing. I stared at the image for a long time. Then the machine shut off again, just like before. The bulb went dark. The room fell silent. When the machine restarted, August 14th was gone. The photographs were gone. The issue no longer existed. I checked the reel repeatedly. Nothing. Only August 13 and August 15th. That afternoon, I searched for the original email request. The message had disappeared, not deleted, gone. No record remained in the system, no sender, no archive, nothing. I checked server logs with help from our IT volunteer. No trace. It was as if the request had never been sent. A week later, I found a folded newspaper clipping tucked inside a book returned to the library. No envelope, no note, just the clipping. The date at the top read August 14, 1968. The article had been cut out. Only the photograph remained. The library, the two suited men, and written across the back in faded pencil were 5 words: no second requests received. I found the tape on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while cleaning out my attic. I had retired the year before after nearly 40 years working as a high school history teacher in rural Vermont. My wife and I had been slowly going through decades of accumulated boxes, old furniture, photo albums, and things we'd stored away and forgotten. The attic was the last major project. Most of what I found wasn't interesting. Christmas decorations, old tax records, my kids' school projects. Then I found a cardboard box with my father's handwriting on it. The box looked older than everything around it. Yellowed tape, faded marker, dust everywhere. My father, Walter Brennan, had died in 1998. I'd gone through most of his belongings years earlier, at least I thought I had. Inside the box were photographs, receipts, newspaper clippings, and a small cassette tape. The tape had a handwritten label, recorded 1987, for family only. That got my attention immediately. My father wasn't the sort of man who left mysterious messages. He was practical, quiet, a mechanic his entire life. The idea that he'd recorded something specifically for family members seemed unusual. I took the tape downstairs. It took me 2 days to find a cassette player that still worked. Eventually, I borrowed one from a neighbor. The recording lasted roughly 30 minutes. The first few minutes were normal. My father talking about family history, names, dates, stories about relatives. Then the tone changed. His voice became noticeably more serious, not frightened, just careful. He began describing something that had happened during the summer of 1967. At the time, he'd been 24 years old. He and 2 friends had been driving home late at night from a fishing trip near Lake Champlain. According to the recording, they saw unusual lights over a field. 3 lights. Silent. Motionless. Nothing dramatic. Nothing impossible. The story remained grounded and straightforward. No aliens, no spaceships, no claims of contact, just strange lights. Then came the part that caught my attention. My father described stopping the truck to get a better look. The lights disappeared. A few minutes later, they noticed a black car parked beside a rural road. 2 men stood near it, watching them. The men never approached, never spoke, just stood there. My father said something about them bothered him. Not because they were threatening, because they appeared to have been waiting. The story continued for another 10 minutes. Then he mentioned a date, or at least he almost did. The tape briefly cut out, just a second or two. When audio returned, the date was gone. The sentence sounded incomplete. I replayed it multiple times. Same result. The tape seemed damaged at that exact moment. Eventually, my father finished the story. According to him, nothing else happened. No encounters, no investigations, no dramatic conclusion. Just an experience he'd never fully understood. The recording ended. I sat there for a while thinking about it, mostly because it felt completely out of character. My father never talked about things like that. Ever. I assumed that would be the end of it. Then small things started happening. Nothing major. Just odd. The following day I received a phone call. Nobody spoke when I answered. Just silence. Then the call disconnected. That happens. Wrong numbers exist. Telemarketers exist. I didn't think much about it. The next day it happened again. Same thing. Silence. Then a click, then nothing. After the third call, I started paying attention. Still not alarmed, just curious. Around the same time, I noticed a dark sedan parked near the end of our road. Not every day, just occasionally. The vehicle never seemed to stay long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then it would leave. Again, not especially alarming. People drive through neighborhoods. I would have forgotten about it if not for what happened 3 days later. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it expecting a delivery. Instead, I found two men standing on the porch. Dark suits, dark ties, polished shoes, one tall and thin, one shorter and broader. Both appeared perfectly dry despite the steady rain. The shorter man smiled. "Mr. Brennan?" I nodded. Neither introduced themselves, neither showed identification. The shorter man asked if they could ask a few questions. Immediately, I assumed they were selling something. Then he mentioned the tape. My stomach tightened, not because I felt threatened, because I genuinely didn't understand how they knew it existed. The men entered after I invited them inside. The conversation began politely. They asked whether I'd recently discovered personal recordings belonging to my father. I confirmed I had. The shorter man nodded. The taller man opened a notebook. Then came the question. Did the tape mention a specific date? Not the story, not the lights, not the encounter, the date. I told them I wasn't sure. The audio cut out briefly. The taller man stopped writing. The shorter man exchanged a glance with him, then asked again, "You're certain?" "Pretty sure." That answer seemed important, very important. The taller man wrote something down. The shorter man nodded slowly, then asked if I'd attempted to restore the damaged section. "No." Another note. The questioning continued. Had I shared the tape, copied it, digitized it, played it for anyone else? The questions felt strangely focused. Everything revolved around the missing date, nothing else. Eventually I asked the obvious question. "How did you know about the tape?" The room became quiet. The shorter man smiled politely. The taller man continued staring at the notebook. Neither answered. I repeated the question. Same result. Silence. Not hostile silence, just complete refusal to acknowledge it. The conversation moved on as if I hadn't spoken. That bothered me more than anything else. Not because they wouldn't answer, because neither seemed uncomfortable refusing. They simply ignored the question. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Eventually, the shorter man asked whether he could hear the recording. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I played the tape. Both men listened carefully. Neither took notes. Neither interrupted. The moment the damaged section approached, both men leaned slightly forward. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Then the audio dropped out. The missing date vanished again. The recording continued. The two men relaxed immediately, almost as if they'd been waiting for that specific moment. The tape ended. Neither commented on the story itself. Instead, the shorter man asked, "Has the interruption always been present?" "Yes." The taller man finally spoke for the first time. "Good." One word. Nothing else. The two men stood shortly afterward. The conversation appeared finished. Then the shorter man paused near the front door. "Did your father ever discuss this incident in person?" "No." "Never?" "Never." The answer seemed to satisfy him. Both men thanked me and left. I watched from the window. The rain continued falling. The sedan waited at the curb. The men got inside and drove away. No license plate was visible on the rear. At least none that I could see. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the missing date. Not the lights, not the strange men. The date. Why did it matter? The next morning, I decided to digitize the tape, mostly out of curiosity. I transferred the recording to my computer, cleaned the audio, reduced background noise, adjusted levels. The damaged section remained. Except now something felt different. The dropout lasted longer, not by much, maybe another second. I assumed I'd made a mistake during processing. I tried again. Same result. The missing section seemed larger. Over the next several days, I became mildly obsessed. I kept restoring the audio, running different filters, trying different software. The gap kept changing, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, never consistently. One evening, I finally isolated a faint sound buried beneath the dropout. A voice. Not my father's. Not clear enough to identify. Just a few words. I spent hours trying to improve it. Eventually, I understood part of a sentence. Only part. "Don't say the..." Then static. Nothing else. The following week, I visited my father's younger brother, my Uncle Raymond. He was 84, still sharp, still living independently. I asked whether he'd ever heard the story. To my surprise, he immediately knew what I was talking about. Not the tape, the incident. His reaction caught me off guard. Apparently, my father had mentioned it once in the late 1970s, only once. I asked whether he remembered a date. Raymond frowned, then became strangely quiet. After several seconds, he shook his head. No. The answer sounded rehearsed, not false exactly, practiced, as though he'd answered before. When I pressed further, he changed the subject. The conversation never returned to the tape. A month later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a brand new cassette tape, completely blank. No label, no note, nothing. Just a cassette. I almost threw it away. Instead, I played it. The tape contained approximately 28 minutes of silence. Then, near the end, a single sentence, spoken by a man's voice I didn't recognize. Calm, clear, matter of fact. The voice said that was not the correct date. Then the tape ended. I was halfway down the block when it happened. My dog, Milo, had stopped to sniff the same patch of grass he always did near the corner, and I was just standing there waiting him out, leash loose in my hand, not really paying attention to anything. It was late, just after 10:30 p.m., and the street was quiet in that normal suburban way. A couple porch lights on, some windows glowing, nothing unusual. Then every light flickered at once, not just one or two, all of them. Porch lights, street lights, even the faint ones coming through windows. It lasted maybe half a second, but it was perfectly synced, like someone had flipped a switch for the entire block. Milo stopped sniffing immediately. He lifted his head, ears up, completely still. I remember looking around, waiting for something else to happen. At first, nothing did. The lights stayed on after that. Everything went back to normal, except it didn't feel normal. The air felt thinner, not physically, just in that way where something changes and you can't quite explain it. Milo didn't move. He just stood there, staring down the street, toward the far end of the block. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was someone walking with a flashlight behind a house or something, a faint glow rising just above the roofline. But it didn't behave like a light should. It moved too smoothly, too steadily, and there was no beam, just a soft, pale orb. It came up slowly from behind the houses at the end of the street. Not fast, not slow enough to feel natural either, just controlled. I felt my grip tighten on the leash without thinking. Milo didn't bark, didn't growl, he just stood there, locked in place, watching. The orb cleared the rooftops and hovered there for a second, maybe 20, 30 feet above them. It wasn't bright, it didn't light anything up around it. The houses beneath it stayed in shadow, but the orb itself was clearly visible, like it had its own separate presence from everything else. I took a few steps forward, without really deciding to, just drawn closer. The street stayed quiet, no cars, no people, no doors opening. It felt like I was the only one seeing it. I glanced at the houses around me, windows still lit, TV flickering in one of them, but no movement, no one else coming outside. I looked back at the orb. It hadn't changed position. Still hovering. Still silent. There was no sound at all, not even the usual background noise, no wind, no distant traffic, just a kind of absence. I noticed Milo's body had gone stiff, not tense like he was about to react, just fixed, like he'd frozen in place. I crouched down and touched his back. He felt normal, warm, but he didn't respond, didn't even look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the orb. I stood back up slowly. The orb shifted then, just slightly, not moving across the sky, more like adjusting its position. A small, smooth glide to the left. Then it stopped again. I felt something in my chest tighten. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation. Like something was about to happen, but I didn't know what. I looked at the streetlights. They hadn't flickered again, but their light felt dimmer now. Or maybe it was just the way the orb stood out against them. I couldn't tell. The orb moved again. This time upward, very slowly, rising higher above the rooftops. Still no sound, still no change in brightness. It just climbed. I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale. The air felt normal, but the silence stayed. Milo finally shifted slightly, not a full movement, just a small step forward, like he was trying to follow it. I pulled gently on the leash. He resisted for a second, then stopped again. The orb reached a higher point and hovered, same as before. perfectly still. I waited, watching, trying to figure out what I was looking at. A drone didn't make sense. Too quiet, too steady, and it didn't have the usual blinking lights. This was just one pale sphere. Then, without warning, it started moving sideways, faster this time. Not fast like a plane, but faster than before. A smooth glide across the sky, parallel to the street. I turned my head to follow it. Milo's body shifted with it like he was tracking it too. The orb passed over the line of houses, maintaining the same height, same speed, same steady glow, no sound, no trail, nothing left behind. It moved across the entire block, and then as it reached the far side, it just faded. Not instantly, but quickly, like it was dimming itself, until it was gone. The sky went back to normal, stars visible again, darkness settling in where it had been. The sound came back right after, subtle at first, a distant car, the faint rustle of leaves, then everything else, like the world had resumed. Milo shook himself suddenly, like he'd snapped out of something. He looked up at me, confused, tail low. Then he pulled gently on the leash, wanting to keep walking. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of it. Nothing else happened. No lights, no movement. Just a normal night again. I walked Milo back home, didn't see anything else on the way, didn't hear anything unusual. Everything felt ordinary, except for that moment. The flicker, the silence, and the way that thing had risen up from behind the houses like it had been there the whole time, just out of sight, waiting, until everything on the street blinked before showing itself. I first noticed it because I thought the compass was broken. My name's Wade Hollister. I've got a small spread about 20 miles outside of Tonopah. Nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle and a few outbuildings. Most days are the same. Feed the animals, check fences, fix whatever needs fixing. There's a dirt road that runs along the far edge of my property. It's not official, just something that's been there forever. Cuts along the perimeter where the land starts getting closer to restricted range territory. You're not supposed to cross certain lines out there, but driving near them isn't a big deal. I use that road maybe once or twice a week, mostly to check fencing on the far side. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. I had an old analog compass clipped to the dash of my truck. Not for navigation really, just something I'd always kept there. Habit, I guess. I was about halfway down that dirt road when I noticed the needle wasn't pointing right. At first, it was just off a little, then it started to drift. Slow at first, like it couldn't decide where to settle. Then it picked up. The needle started turning in a steady circle, not jerky, smooth, just spinning. I tapped the glass, nothing changed. I slowed the truck down. The needle kept spinning. I remember thinking maybe I'd knocked it loose somehow, or something inside had broken, but it didn't look broken. It looked like it was reacting to something. I kept driving. The faster I went, the steadier the spin became. Not faster exactly, just more consistent, like it had locked into a rhythm. I glanced at my phone, checked the GPS. Map was fine, position was fine, everything normal. Only the compass was acting strange. After a few minutes, I got curious. I pulled over, left the engine running at first. The needle kept spinning. Same pace, same smooth motion. I shut the engine off, sat there, watched it. The needle slowed, gradually, like something was easing off. After about 10 seconds, it stopped, settled into a normal position, pointing north again. I stared at it for a bit, then started the truck back up. As soon as the engine turned over, the needle twitched. Then it started spinning again. That's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence. I drove a little farther down the road. Same thing. Constant spin. I turned around, headed back the way I came. At a certain point, the needle slowed again, then stopped. Back to normal. I made a mental note of where it happened. Didn't think about it too much after that. Just figured there was something in the ground. Old metal, maybe. Some kind of deposit. A week later, I drove that same road again. This time, I paid attention. Right when I hit that same stretch, the needle started moving. Same pattern, same smooth rotation. I slowed down, trying to pinpoint exactly where it started. It wasn't a single spot, it was a section of the road, maybe half a mile long. Anywhere inside it, the compass went off. Outside it, everything was normal. I tested it a few more times over the next couple weeks. Same results every time. Engine on, needle spins. Engine off, it settles. GPS never changed. Phone worked fine. Radio worked fine too, though once or twice I noticed a bit of static when I was right in the middle of that stretch. Nothing consistent, just a faint crackle. One morning, I decided to bring another compass, just a cheap one from a hardware store. Held it in my hand while I drove. When I hit the spot, it started to move too. Not as smooth as the one on the dash, more jittery, but still turning. I stopped again, turned the engine off. Both compasses slowed, then stopped, pointing the same direction. I got out of the truck, stood there with the handheld compass. The air was still, no wind. No sound except a faint hum of insects. The needle didn't move. I took a few steps away from the truck, still steady. I walked toward the center of that stretch. Nothing changed. Then I got back in the truck, started the engine. Both needles began to move again. That's when it started bothering me. It wasn't just location, it was something about the truck being on, or maybe something interacting with it. A few days later, I ran into my neighbor, Carl. He's been out there longer than me, knows the land better than anyone. I mentioned it casually. Hey, you ever notice anything weird with compasses on that perimeter road? He looked at me for a second, then said, yours spinning too? That caught me off guard. Yeah, I said. You've seen it? He nodded. Been like that for years. Any idea why? He shrugged. Nope. I asked him if he'd ever checked it out further. He shook his head. Didn't seem like something worth digging into. That was the end of that conversation. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started paying attention to other things. The way the air felt in that stretch. The way sound carried. One evening, just before sunset, I drove out there again. Hot day. The ground's still radiating heat. You could see the air shimmering above the dirt. I slowed down as I approached the area. The compass started spinning, right on cue. But this time, I noticed something else. The heat waves. They looked different. Not stronger, just more defined, like the air was bending in a more uniform way. Hard to explain, almost like there was a shape to it. I stopped the truck, left the engine running, watched the air ahead of me. For a second, I thought I saw something move, not an object, just a shift, like the shimmer slid sideways slightly, then it went back to normal. I turned the engine off, the compass slowed, the air looked normal again. I sat there for a long time, watching, waiting. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I drove back home. The compass settled as soon as I left that stretch. Everything normal again. I still drive that road, still check the fences, and every time I pass through that section, the needle starts spinning. Same way, same pace, like something in that space is affecting it. But only when the truck is running, only when I'm moving through it. And what I can't shake is how consistent it is. Not random, not changing. Just a fixed stretch of land where something unseen interacts just enough to make the needle lose its direction before letting it settle again like nothing ever touched it at all. The static started before I ever saw anything. My name's Rick Alvarez. I've been driving long haul for about 11 years, mostly West Coast routes. There's a stretch in Nevada I used to take a lot. Long, empty highway cutting through flat desert with nothing around for miles. You get used to quiet out there. But this was different. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. My CB just started filling with static as I got closer to a certain mile marker. Not loud, not screeching, just a low, steady hiss that pushed everything else out. I adjusted the volume, checked the channel, nothing changed. Then about a mile later it cleared, perfectly clean again. I figured it was interference, maybe some kind of tower or equipment nearby. Except there was nothing out there, no buildings, no power lines, nothing, just open desert. It happened again the next night. Same route, same time, roughly. As I approached that stretch, the CB started hissing again. Same kind of static, same range, about a mile or two. Then it stopped once I passed through. I started paying attention after that. Marked the location roughly in my head. There's a sign out there, one of those faded green ones with a county road number on it. The static always started a little before that, always stopped just after. I mentioned it to another driver over the radio one time. He didn't know what I was talking about, said his radio worked fine through there. I figured maybe it was just my equipment, loose wiring or something, but everything else worked perfectly. Only that one spot gave me issues. After a few weeks, it just became part of the route. I'd drive, static would kick in, then it would clear, routine, until the night I saw it. It was late, closer to 2 a.m., Clear sky, no clouds, you could see the stars really well out there. I was running steady, no traffic ahead or behind for miles. CB was quiet, normal. As I got closer to that stretch, I found myself waiting for the static, watching the mile markers. Sure enough, just before I reached the sign, the static started. Same low hiss, filling the speaker. I reached over and turned the volume down slightly. Didn't bother trying to fix it this time, just let it run. I kept my eyes on the road, headlights cutting a clean path ahead. Then I noticed something. At first I thought it was just a reflection, a faint glow in the distance, centered over the road. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. It wasn't a reflection, it was a light, pale, almost white, but not harsh, just soft, sitting above the road, not far ahead, maybe a few hundred yards. I slowed down a little, didn't take my eyes off it. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just hovered there, perfectly still. I checked my mirrors, still no one behind me, no headlights coming the other way, just me and that light. The static on the CB got stronger. Not louder exactly, just thicker, like it was filling more space. I rolled down the window slightly. The air outside was still, no wind, no sound, just that low hiss from the radio. I kept driving, slowly. The light stayed in place, didn't get closer in the way you'd expect. It just remained. Same size, same brightness, like distance didn't matter. I eased off the accelerator more, didn't want to rush it, didn't want to get too close too fast. As I got within what felt like maybe 100 yards, I could see it clearer. It wasn't attached to anything. No pole, no vehicle, no structure. Just a sphere, or close to one. Hard to tell exactly. It had no edges that caught the light, no visible surface. Just a smooth, uniform glow, hovering maybe 10 feet above the road. I felt that pressure in my ears then, like when you go up in altitude too quickly. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air inside the cab felt heavier. I gripped the wheel tighter, kept moving forward. The light didn't react, didn't shift, didn't rise or fall. It just stayed there, waiting. I got closer, 50 yards, 40. Still no change. The static on the CB was constant now. No brakes, no voices. Just that steady hiss. I remember thinking I should stop, pull over, but something in me didn't want to. I just wanted to pass it, keep going. I eased the truck forward, closer, closer. As I reached what should have been right under it, it moved. Not away, up, straight up, fast. But not sudden like a flash, more like a smooth lift. 1 second it was 10 feet above the road, the next it was above the cab, then higher, higher. No sound, no change in brightness, just rising. I craned my neck, looking up through the windshield. The light kept going, straight up into the sky, no arc, no drift, just vertical, until it got small enough to blend with the stars, then it was gone, just like that. The static cut out instantly. The CB went silent, clear, like nothing had happened. The pressure in my ears released. The air felt normal again. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't slow down any further, just kept going. Hands tight on the wheel, eyes forward. The road looked exactly the same as it always did. No mark where the light had been, no change in the pavement, nothing. I passed the sign. Kept going for another 10 miles before I even thought about pulling over. When I finally did, I just sat there for a minute, engine idling, CB quiet, trying to make sense of it. The next time I drove that route, I paid attention again. Watched for the static. It still happened. Same spot, same stretch. But I never saw the light again. Just that empty section of road where the radio goes dead, like something is still there, just out of sight, affecting everything it touches, except this time, not showing itself at all. I saw it before the sun came up, when everything was still that flat gray blue you get just before daylight. My name's Aaron. I'd driven out early to hike a ridge trail I'd been meaning to check out for a while. It's a few miles outside town, nothing extreme, just a gradual climb with a long stretch along the top that overlooks a valley. I started just after 5 a.m. No one else in the parking area, just my car and one other truck that looked like it had been there overnight. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but not freezing. The ground was dry, no frost. Sky was mostly clear with some low clouds drifting across the ridgeline. The trail was easy to follow, and I had a headlamp on for the first part, but I turned it off once my eyes adjusted. That early light is enough to see shapes, just not details. I'd been hiking maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the glow. It wasn't in front of me, it was off to the right, across a shallow dip in the terrain, along the higher ridge that ran parallel to the trail. At first, I thought it was someone else hiking with a light. It had that kind of color, orange warm, but dim. Not like a flashlight beam, more like a small, steady glow. I stopped walking and watched it. It moved, slowly, following the line of the ridge. I could see the silhouette of the terrain against the sky, and the light tracked along it, staying just above the ground. That's what made me think it was a person at first. But something about it didn't match. There was no beam, no spread, just a single point of light moving along the ridge. And it didn't bob. When someone walks with a light, even if they're steady, there's always a slight up and down motion. This didn't have that. It stayed perfectly level relative to the ground, like it was gliding. I started walking again, slower this time, keeping my eyes on it. The trail curved slightly, bringing me a little closer to that side of the ridge. The light kept moving. Same speed, same height. I tried to judge the distance. Maybe a couple 100 yards away. Hard to tell in that light. I stopped again and listened. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of gravel or gear. Just the usual early morning quiet. A faint breeze through the brush. Nothing else. The light continued along the ridge, following the contour of the land exactly. When the ground rose, it rose with it. When it dipped slightly, it dipped. But it did it too smoothly, too precisely, like it was locked to the shape of the terrain. I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of animal with a tag or something reflective. But that didn't make sense either. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was its own light. And it wasn't moving like an animal. No sudden changes, no pauses, just a steady, controlled motion. I pulled my phone out and tried to zoom in. It didn't help. The light just looked like a faint dot on the screen. I lowered the phone and kept watching. The sky was getting slightly brighter now. Still not sunrise, but enough that the outline of the ridge was clearer. I could see there was nothing else around the light. No person. No shape. Just that glow. It moved along for another minute or so. Then it slowed. Not abruptly, just gradually, until it came to a stop near a higher point on the ridge. It stayed there, hovering just above the ground. I stood still, watching it, waiting for something to happen. A few seconds passed. Then it moved again, but not along the ridge this time. It went up, straight up, no angle, no curve, just vertical. I blinked, thinking I'd misjudged the perspective, but no, it was rising, leaving the line of the terrain, climbing into the air. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just a constant upward motion, completely silent. I felt that pressure in my ears again, like when you go up an elevation too quickly. I swallowed, tried to clear it. It didn't fully go away. The light kept rising. Now it was clearly above the ridge, against the sky. Still the same size, still the same color, no flicker, no change. It reached the level of the low clouds, those thin patches drifting across the ridge. The light didn't illuminate them, didn't cast anything. It just passed into them. For a second, I could still see it through the cloud, faintly, like a muted glow behind a thin layer. Then it faded, not like it turned off, more like it was being absorbed by the cloud, until there was nothing, just the normal gray of the sky. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where it disappeared. Nothing else moved, no second light, no sound, just the slow drift of the clouds. I checked the time, 5:32. I'd been watching it for longer than I thought. I looked around, half expecting someone else to be out there. There wasn't anyone. The trail behind me was empty. The ridge ahead was empty. No sign of anyone who could have been carrying a light. I kept hiking after that. Made it to the top of the ridge just before sunrise. The view was normal. Nothing out of place. I even walked over toward where I thought I'd seen the light moving earlier. There was nothing there. No tracks. No marks, just dry ground and scattered rocks. I stood there for a bit, trying to line up the position, trying to figure out if I'd misjudged the distance. But it didn't help. The space looked completely ordinary. I headed back down once the sun came up. The whole way down, everything felt normal again. Birds started making noise, the air warmed up slightly, just a regular morning. But the part that keeps sticking with me is how the light moved along the ridge, how it followed the terrain perfectly without any of the small movements you'd expect from a person, and how when it stopped, it didn't turn or change direction. It just went straight up, like whatever it was done moving along the ground and needed to leave without making a sound, without leaving anything behind, just disappearing into the clouds. like it had never been part of the landscape at all. It started about 15 minutes after I left the diner in Hanksville. I'd been staying in an old camper trailer about 5 miles outside town, just off a dirt road that doesn't show up on most maps. Quiet place. No neighbors, no traffic, just the kind of silence you only get out there in the Utah desert. I drove into town that night to grab dinner and some coffee. Around 9:45 p.m., I started heading back. Sky was clear. Cool night, maybe 50 degrees. No wind. I'd taken the truck, an '03 Tacoma with about 200,000 miles on it, and I wasn't in a hurry, cruising along at maybe 45. The road's narrow and a little washboarded in places, but it's straight for the most part. Nothing around but low scrub and open desert. You can see for miles in daylight, but at night it's just black, like driving through ink. About 2 miles from my turnoff, I noticed a light in my side mirror. It looked like a headlight, maybe a single motorcycle behind me. Except it wasn't bouncing like it should have been on that kind of road. Just a smooth, steady glow like someone had mounted a flashlight to a camera dolly. I watched it for a while. It kept the same distance, maybe 200 feet behind me, and never gained or fell back. Didn't sway, didn't bob, just stayed dead even with my speed. At first I figured it was some local out for a night ride, maybe using an aftermarket light bar. But the light was too white, almost bluish. No other colors, no glare, just one tight, solid beam. I tapped the brakes once to see if they'd slow down. Nothing. They matched me. I slowed to 35. So did they. I sped back up to 50. They followed. I leaned over and flipped off my dash lights so I could see better out the rear window. Still just the one white light. No engine sound. I rolled down my window to listen. Nothing but the tires on gravel. About a mile from the trailer, I pulled over, just eased onto the shoulder and stopped. The light didn't stop right away, but it slowed, then coasted to a stop behind me, same distance as before. I sat there a second with the engine running and my hand on the shifter. I looked in the mirror. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. Just sat there. Still dead quiet. I opened the door and stepped out. Left the engine running, headlights on, walked around to the back of the truck and stood there, facing it. The light wasn't attached to anything. No bike, no ATV, just the light itself, hovering maybe 6 feet off the ground, perfectly still. It was the size of a grapefruit. No housing, no visible source, just a ball of white-blue light floating in midair. It didn't cast shadows either. My tailgate was lit up, but there were no sharp edges to the light, like it wasn't really illuminating anything, just glowing. I don't scare easy. I did 20 years flying F-18s off carriers, night ops, cat shots in pitch black storms, but this didn't make sense. No noise, no heat, no structure, just there. I raised my hand and waved. It didn't react. Then I reached for my flashlight in the truck bed. Soon as I moved, the light shifted. Not fast, just a gentle drift to the right like it was watching me from a different angle. I froze. It stopped moving. I stepped back. It stayed where it was. I don't know how long I stood there, a minute maybe. Then it started to move again, but not toward me. It began to rise, smooth straight up. No acceleration, just an impossible climb like it was on an elevator. It went up maybe 50 feet, paused, then shot straight upward. Gone. Just like that. No arc, no fade, just a vertical streak and nothing. No sound. The sky was empty. I got back in the truck and drove the rest of the way home. Didn't even look in the mirrors. Just kept my eyes forward, hands on the wheel. Pulled into the trailer lot, killed the engine, locked the doors behind me. Sat on the couch for an hour with the lights off. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I know what people think when a guy says he saw a floating light out in the desert. But I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. And I've spent my whole adult life around aircraft. I've seen stealth tests, drones, weird DARPA crap that never made it past prototypes. This wasn't any of that. There's no way to explain how something can track you like that. Match your speed perfectly, hover in dead silence, then disappear like a bottle rocket straight into space. I haven't seen it again. But I don't take that road after dark anymore. I drive the long way through the pass now, even though it adds 30 minutes. Feels safer somehow. It started the morning after that big thunderstorm in late August, Thursday, I think. We'd had nearly 2 inches of rain overnight, and the wind tore through like a freight train. I figured I'd lose a few limbs off the oaks again, or maybe get another fence post loosened by the runoff. What I didn't expect was to find half my northern plot looking like a vinyl record got pressed into it. I went out around 6:30, just as the sun was getting high enough to throw light through the mist. That part of Kentucky gets these heavy ground fogs after storms. Everything looked silver, soft. I had a cup of gas station coffee in one hand and my boots half-laced, because I wasn't planning to be out more than 10 minutes, just checking the irrigation lines before the heat came back. I noticed something was off when I walked the first row past the old irrigation pump. The corn didn't look wind damaged. It was flat, but not broken. Not snapped or twisted like you'd see after a big gust, just laid down. Even, like something pushed it gently, with weight, not force. I walked in a little ways, maybe 10 feet, and that's when I saw the shape of it. It wasn't random. The pattern started narrow, swelled in the middle, then narrowed again, almost like a pulse. Not a perfect circle or spiral like those crop circle hoaxes. More jagged, uneven, but still deliberate. Like someone mapped a sound wave onto the field and pressed it down with a hand the size of a bus. The stalks were laid over without being bent. I picked one up and it just flopped back down. Leaves still green, ears still intact. Like the plant gave up standing for a while but hadn't died. I looked for tracks. Mud was still soft, but there weren't any boot prints. No tire ruts. No sign anyone had walked in or out. Even the field mice hadn't come back yet. I thought maybe hail had done it somehow, or the downdraft from a lightning strike, but there was no scorch, no debris. Just this weird, quiet swath of perfect pressure. 50 feet long, maybe 15 wide. I walked the whole thing. The deeper I went, the more unsettled I felt. There was a kind of silence there I couldn't explain. Deeper than normal. Like the sound of the wind in the rest of the corn didn't reach that patch. My own footsteps sounded muffled. I backed out and went to get the dog. Maple's a mutt, some border collie in her, maybe lab too. Smart, loyal, loud when she needs to be. I figured she'd sniff it out, maybe clue me into what kind of animal could have bedded down there. She wouldn't go in. Stood at the edge of the flattened section and whined. Tail down, ears pinned, just pacing. I gave her space. Tried again 10 minutes later. Same thing. She actually barked at it once, just one sharp bark, then turned around and trotted back toward the house. That's when I started to feel it, a kind of pressure in my ears, like when you're climbing too fast. Subtle, but there. I stood still and just listened. There was a hum, real faint, not from machinery or bugs, lower than that. Almost like the inside of your own head when everything's quiet. But it was external, I'm sure of that. I backed off again, sat on the porch for a bit and tried to rationalize it. Maybe the rain had shifted something underground, pipes, drainage tile, I don't know. Maybe it was an echo from one of the military flights they run out of Fort Campbell, although I hadn't heard any jets go over. I didn't go back in until the next morning. That second day, the air felt normal again, but the shape was still there. Same stalks laid flat, no footprints. The edges were sharp, no gradual tapering, just standing corn, then downed corn like it had been sliced. I brought a moisture reader out. The flattened area was drier than the rest of the field, which didn't make sense after a storm. Like it had been shielded or pressed dry. No scorch marks, no burns, no animal waste. Just that same sound wave shape, still too clean to be weather. On the third day, I marked the edges with little garden flags, figuring maybe I could come back and measure it more carefully. That afternoon, the flags were gone. Not knocked over, gone. The wire sticks weren't even in the ground anymore. I thought maybe Maple had chewed them, but she wasn't even going near that plot. Wouldn't go past the barn. The weirdest part was that the corn started to stand back up by itself, but only in the center of the shape. The outer part stayed flat. Over the next couple days, the middle rose like something had pushed it down, then let go. By Monday, it was almost gone. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I didn't report it. Who do you call for something like that? The sheriff? They'd just blame the storm. And maybe they'd be right. But I've seen storm damage. This wasn't it. I've worked that land since I was 22. I know what deer do. I know how raccoons flatten paths, how coyotes dig. I've had neighbors' kids sneak onto the property and mess with stuff. This wasn't that. Whatever it was, didn't leave trash. Didn't break anything. Didn't take anything. It just made a shape. pressed it into the earth like a fingerprint, and then vanished. I was driving through western Montana late at night when this happened. It was early October, cold enough that patches of old snow still sat in the trees above the highway. I'd been on the road for hours already, heading east through the mountains after visiting a friend near Coeur d'Alene. The weather had turned ugly around midnight. Not full rain, more like freezing mist blowing across the road in waves. My windshield kept fogging around the edges, even with the heat running. There weren't many other cars out that late, which made the whole drive feel isolated fast. Around 1:30 in the morning, I reached one of the mountain tunnels off I-90. I don't remember the exact name now, just that it was longer than I expected. Concrete walls, yellow sodium lights overhead every 50 feet or so. I remember checking the fuel gauge before entering because I was planning to stop at the next town. The tunnel entrance looked black against the mountainside. The second I drove inside, the radio filled with static. Not unusual in tunnels, but it happened instantly, like somebody flipped a switch. I lowered the volume and kept driving. The tunnel curved slightly at first before straightening out. That's when I noticed the light at the far exit. At first I thought it was headlights outside the tunnel entrance on the opposite side, but after a few seconds I realized it didn't look right. It was perfectly circular, bright white, and completely still. Usually, tunnel exits expand gradually as you approach them. You see trees or sky around the opening eventually. This didn't change size at all. It stayed the exact same distance-looking circle no matter how far I drove. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder because my brain kept trying to correct what I was seeing. The tunnel lights passed overhead steadily. The circle remained fixed ahead. I checked my speedometer, 55, normal speed. The tunnel definitely wasn't that long. I'd driven through enough of them before to know the exit should have gotten closer quickly. Instead, the light just sat there waiting at the far end. Not blinding bright either. Soft somehow. Like light through frosted glass. I glanced in the rearview mirror expecting maybe exhaustion was messing with me. The tunnel behind looked normal, yellow lights shrinking into darkness, no cars behind me. When I looked forward again, the circular light appeared slightly lower than before. That's when I noticed another strange thing. The inside of the tunnel had gone quiet. My tires still hummed against pavement, but the sound felt muffled. Even the engine noise seemed farther away. Then my dashboard clock flickered, just once. 12:44 became 12 for half a second before returning. I remember because I thought my battery might be failing. The circular light ahead remained perfectly unchanged. I started counting the overhead tunnel lights to calm myself down. 10 passed. 20. 30. Still no closer. That's when I first felt actual fear, not panic. Just this growing certainty that something about the tunnel was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I picked up my phone from the passenger seat. No service. Again, normal for tunnels. But the phone itself felt unusually warm in my hand. I opened the camera thinking maybe recording the tunnel would help me judge distance somehow. The screen showed the tunnel normally for a second. Then the image distorted. Not glitching exactly. More like the brightness kept pulling toward the center where the circular light sat. The tunnel walls looked darker on screen than in real life. I shut the camera off immediately. The air inside the car smelled strange then. Not smoke, almost metallic, like wet pennies. I cracked the window briefly, thinking maybe something in the vents overheated. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the same smell. Then I heard something outside the car, a sound matching my speed. Not another vehicle, more like soft tapping along the passenger side. Tap, tap, tap. I looked right immediately. Nothing there except tunnel wall sliding past. The tapping stopped, then resumed on the driver's side instead. Very light, like fingertips brushing metal. I sped up without thinking, 65 now. The circular light ahead stayed exactly the same size. That was the moment my stomach really dropped. I actually said out loud, no, because it became impossible to ignore. I should have reached the exit already. The tunnel overhead lights suddenly seemed farther apart too. Darker between them. I checked the rearview mirror again. The tunnel behind no longer curved. It stretched perfectly straight into darkness. I know tunnels don't reshape themselves. I know that sounds insane, but I remembered the bend near the entrance clearly because I'd adjusted the wheel when entering. Now it looked dead straight. The tapping sound came back louder this time, not on the doors anymore. Above me. 3 slow knocks against the roof of the car. Knock, knock, knock. I ducked automatically, even though I knew how stupid that was. The tunnel lights flickered, just once. During the flicker, I saw something standing near the wall ahead on the right side of the tunnel. Tall shape. Still. Gone when the lights stabilized again. I slammed the brakes instinctively. The tires squealed slightly on damp pavement. The car slowed hard enough that my seatbelt locked. And still, the circular light ahead didn't change distance. That terrified me more than anything else. I sat there, breathing hard in the middle of the tunnel. The engine idled roughly. No other cars appeared. No sounds except ventilation fans somewhere far away overhead. Then the circular light brightened slightly. Not larger, just brighter. And I realized it wasn't actually at the tunnel exit. It sat inside the tunnel itself, hovering above the road. I could suddenly see darkness around it. The realization hit me so hard I almost stalled the car, trying to accelerate again. I drove faster, 70 now. Tunnel lights streaked overhead. The circular light remained fixed in front of me no matter what speed I reached. Then my radio crackled alive again. Static blasted through the speakers, followed by a voice. At least I thought it was a voice. It sounded distant and stretched out, like audio slowed down too far to understand. I switched the radio off completely. The sound continued another 2 seconds through dead speakers before stopping. I remember becoming aware then that the tunnel walls looked wet, not damp from weather. Glossy, reflective. My headlights slid across them strangely, and every reflection seemed delayed by a fraction of a second. The tapping returned on the roof. This time it moved, from the back of the car slowly toward the windshield. Tap, 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 tracking above me. I hunched lower in the seat, gripping the wheel so hard my hands cramped. The circular light remained dead center ahead. Then something changed with the tunnel air pressure. My ears popped painfully. The windshield fogged instantly from the outside. Not fully. Just enough that the tunnel blurred around the edges. Except the circular light stayed perfectly sharp through the fog. I heard another sound then. Breathing. Not mine. Very faint from somewhere inside the car. I checked the back seat immediately. Empty. But the smell of wet metal grew much stronger. My phone screen lit up suddenly on the passenger seat. No notification. Just lit itself. The front camera was active. I know it was because I could see the tiny green indicator. The screen faced upward toward the ceiling, and reflected faintly in the glass, I saw something pale moving across the roof outside the car. Long shape, smooth, keeping pace. I grabbed the phone and threw it into the back seat without looking again. At that exact moment, the circular light vanished, completely gone. Dark tunnel ahead. Then suddenly, I burst out the far exit. Cold night exploded around the car. Wind, trees, open mountain road. I nearly swerved onto the shoulder because the transition happened so abruptly. The tunnel behind me shrank in the mirror immediately like normal distance, finally returned all at once. I kept driving another mile before pulling over at a scenic turnout. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys trying to shut the engine off. Outside, the mountains looked normal. Mist moving through pines, distant highway sounds below. The metallic smell lingered inside the car. I checked the time. 1:58 a.m. That made no sense. The tunnel crossing should have taken maybe 2 minutes. 3 at most. I grabbed my phone from the back seat, battery down to 2%. The camera app still open. At first, the screen looked black. Then I realized it wasn't. There was video playing silently. The footage showed the inside roof of my car, dark fabric ceiling lit by occasional tunnel lights. The timestamp showed 6 minutes of recording. For most of it, nothing happened. Then around halfway through, the ceiling slowly brightened with reflected white light. And near the rear windshield, something briefly crossed into frame. Not fully visible, just long, pale fingers sliding across the outside glass before disappearing upward again. I deleted the video immediately, or at least I tried to. The phone froze until the battery died in my hand. While sitting there at the turnout, another car finally emerged from the tunnel behind me. Pickup truck. Normal headlights. It slowed briefly as it passed my parked car, The driver looked over at me strangely, then continued down the highway. I watched his taillights disappear around the bend. After that, I looked back toward the tunnel entrance one last time. For a second, I thought I saw the same circular light again, far inside it. Small, perfectly round, waiting motionless in the dark. The signal came through right after I crossed the county line. It was 1:43 in the morning, and I was hauling frozen chicken from Wichita to a distribution center outside Billings. I'd been on the road since noon, and by then, everything had narrowed down to headlights, lane markers, and the sound of my tires humming on the pavement. I was on a lonely stretch of Highway 83 in western Nebraska. Flat country, no towns close by, no gas stations. Just dark fields on both sides and the occasional fence post flashing past in my headlights. The weather had turned ugly about an hour earlier. Not a full storm, just hard wind and sleet that came in sideways. It clicked against the windshield like thrown gravel. My wipers were fighting it, smearing more than clearing. I had the radio off. That part matters. The truck's radio had been acting up for weeks, cutting in and out, so I'd pulled the fuse earlier that day while I was stopped at a repair lot in Colby. I'd gotten tired of random bursts of static blasting through the cab. I meant to have it looked at later. So the dash was dark, no display, no hum, nothing. I was driving in silence when a voice came through the speakers. A man's voice, low, calm, like someone reading weather conditions. Northbound commercial vehicle approaching mile marker 172. I took my foot off the gas without thinking. The voice had come from inside the cab. No doubt about it. Not from my phone. Not from the CB. From the truck speakers. I stared at the dark radio panel. The voice continued. Surface conditions, wet ice, shoulder instability on the east side, driver alertness reduced. My hands tightened on the wheel. There was a mile marker coming up on the right, 172. I passed it 2 seconds later. My mouth went dry. I remember leaning forward, like getting closer to the windshield would help me understand what was happening outside. The voice stopped for maybe 10 seconds. Then it came back. Vehicle will experience temporary signal convergence. Maintain lane position. The sleet got worse right then, hard enough that I couldn't see more than a few truck lengths ahead. The road disappeared into gray streaks. I slowed to 40, then 35. A shape moved in the field to my right. At first I thought it was a deer. Then I realized it was too tall and moving wrong, not running, not walking exactly, just keeping pace with me through the dark parallel to the road beyond the reach of my headlights. I blinked hard and looked again. Nothing there. The voice said, "Do not respond to roadside movement." I almost swerved. I said out loud, "Nope, no, absolutely not." The speakers gave a short crackle. Then, in the same calm voice, verbal acknowledgement received. I reached for the CB and shut it off, even though I knew it wasn't coming from there. I unplugged the phone charger. I turned off the overhead light. Anything I could think of. The voice kept going. Upcoming grade. Reduced visibility. Maintain current speed. I knew that stretch. There was a shallow dip ahead where wind pushed ice across the road. I'd driven it before, but not in weather like that. I wanted to pull over, but there wasn't a safe shoulder, just narrow gravel and drainage ditch. The kind of place you stop and someone finds you jackknifed at sunrise. The sleet changed sound, softer, then stopped completely. For about 30 seconds, the road ahead was clear. No precipitation, no wind, nothing hitting the glass. But the fields on both sides were still blurred white, like the storm continued everywhere except in the narrow lane around my truck. The voice said, "Window established." I drove through that clear patch with my whole body locked up. Then a set of lights appeared ahead. Not headlights. Too low, too close to the ground. 3 pale dots lined up along the center of the road, maybe a quarter-mile away. I slowed again. The dots didn't move toward me. They just sat there, perfectly still. The voice came through softer. "Do not stop in the lit area." "What lit area?" I said, even though I was looking right at it. The speakers hissed. "Continue through." Every normal part of me said to brake. There could have been something in the road. A wreck, a stranded car, cattle, anything. But there were no hazard lights, no reflective triangles, no shapes around the lights. As I got closer, the 3 dots seemed to sink, not dim. Sink, like they were dropping through the pavement. By the time I reached that spot, they were gone. The truck rolled over something. Not a bump. more like a pressure change. My ears popped. The cab felt too small for half a second. Then the storm hit again all at once. Sleet hammered the windshield. Wind shoved the trailer sideways. I corrected hard and felt the rear end slide before catching. The voice said, "Deviation avoided." I shouted, "Who is this?" No answer. I kept driving because stopping felt worse. For the next 20 minutes, the broadcast came and went. Sometimes it described things before I reached them. A broken reflector post, a patch of standing water, a disabled farm gate on the left. Every time, it was right. Then it started describing me. Driver is alone. My breathing went shallow. Driver has not slept sufficiently. The wipers thumped back and forth. Driver is aware of secondary presence. I looked into the passenger seat. Nothing, just my coat, a clipboard, an empty coffee bottle rolling gently with the motion of the truck. I looked back at the road. The voice said, "Do not look beside you again." I didn't. Not for miles. At 2:18, the road passed through a shallow cut between two low hills. The storm eased again, and the cab filled with a low tone. Not loud, more like pressure, like when you drive under power lines and feel it in your teeth. The radio voice changed then. It became closer. "Northbound commercial vehicle has entered monitored section." I had a sudden, stupid thought that someone was watching from a tower or a drone, feeding the signal somehow. But there were no towers out there. No houses. No vehicles. "Driver should forget the phrase spoken at mile marker 179, the voice said. I hadn't reached mile marker 179 yet. A minute later, I passed it. The road ahead looked normal for maybe 3 seconds. Then something pale stood on the shoulder. Not a person. Not exactly. It was too narrow, too still, and the shape was wrong around the head and shoulders. My headlights caught it only briefly, but I saw enough to slam my back against the seat like I was trying to get farther away inside the cab. The voice came through clear and calm. "The man beside the road has no face." I drove past it without turning my head. I didn't want to know if it was still there in the mirror. After that, the broadcast stopped. No fade, no static, just silence. I drove until the sky started turning gray. By then the storm had passed, and everything looked ordinary in that washed-out morning way. Wet pavement, fence lines, cows standing in muddy fields, the kind of normal that made the night feel like something I dreamed while awake. I pulled into a rest stop a little after 7, small place. 2 vending machines, bathrooms, a few picnic tables, and a line of trucks idling along the far edge. I parked away from everyone else and sat with both hands on the wheel. The radio panel was still dark. I checked the fuse box. The fuse was still missing, sitting in the cup holder where I'd left it. I got out to use the bathroom. My legs felt weak, like I'd been driving for days. When I came back, 2 men were standing near my truck. They weren't looking at it, they were looking at me. Both wore dark coats despite the morning being cold, but not freezing. No hats, no gloves. One was tall and thin, with a long face and dark hair combed flat. The other was shorter, broader, with a round face and a small, polite smile. I slowed down. The taller one said, "Mr. Larkin?" I didn't answer. He smiled like that was acceptable. "We're following up on some audio interference you experienced overnight." I felt my stomach pull tight. "What?" "Audio interference," the shorter man said gently. "During your route." I didn't report anything. "No," the tall one said. "You didn't." A truck idled behind them, engine rattling, exhaust drifting white in the cold air. A man in a red hoodie walked past us toward the vending machines. He didn't glance over, like he didn't notice the conversation happening 10 feet away. The shorter man looked at my cab. His eyes went right to the dash. "Radio disconnected," he said. "It was disconnected before anything happened," I said, before I could stop myself. Both men looked satisfied. The taller one took out a small notebook. "So you did experience a broadcast." I didn't say that. "You implied it." I looked around the rest stop. It suddenly felt too open, too empty, even with people nearby. "Who are you with?" I asked. "Monitoring," the taller man said. "Monitoring what?" "Road conditions," the shorter one said. I almost laughed. "Road conditions don't talk through disconnected radios." He smiled wider. "Usually, no." They asked what I'd heard. I told them I was tired and probably picked up some signal through the CB. The tall one wrote that down, though his face said he didn't believe me. "Did the broadcast mention roadside movement?" he asked. I didn't answer. "Did it instruct you not to stop?" Still nothing. The shorter man tilted his head slightly. Did it describe a figure? My hands went cold. The taller one watched me carefully. You should be specific. Specific memories degrade less. I don't remember, I said. That was a lie, and they both knew it. The shorter man stepped a little closer. The man beside the road has no face, he said, word for word. The rest stop seemed to drop away around me. I heard the vending machine hum, a door slam somewhere. My own breathing too loud. How do you know that? I asked. The shorter man looked confused for the first time. Not fake confused. Real, quick, almost annoyed. It was included, he said. In what? He looked at the taller man. The taller man closed his notebook. That phrase was not intended to remain with you. Well, it did, I says. He said. That's why we're here. They didn't threaten me. They didn't ask for my phone or my logbook. They didn't even tell me to stay quiet. They just asked me to confirm whether the voice had used my route number, whether it had identified me by name, and whether I had seen lights on the pavement. I lied about the lights. The taller man let me finish, then said, "You're allowed to be inaccurate." The shorter man added, "As long as you remain consistent." I didn't know what that meant. A few minutes later, they thanked me. Before they left, the taller one glanced up at my windshield. "You should replace the fuse before continuing." Why? So the next signal has somewhere proper to go. They walked away between the parked trucks. I watched them pass behind a tanker and waited for them to come out the other side. They didn't. I checked under the truck, around the restrooms, along the fence. Nothing. No car. No footprints in the wet gravel that matched where they'd been standing. I climbed back into the cab and sat there for a long time. Eventually, I put the fuse back in. The radio lit up like normal. Country station, faint but clear. Some morning host laughing about school closings. I drove the rest of the way to Billings with the volume turned low. 2 days later, I checked my dash cam footage from that night. Most of it was normal. Road, storm, wipers, headlights. At mile marker 179, the audio cut out completely, even though the dash cam had its own mic. The video showed the shoulder for less than a second. There was nothing standing there. But the camera tilted slightly to the right as I passed, like someone in the passenger seat had reached over and turned it away. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I first noticed it. Not in the room. My eyes were closed. At first I thought it was just one of those random flashes you get sometimes when you're tired. Little bits of light behind your eyelids, like your brain misfiring as you drift off. But this was different. It didn't flash. It built. Slowly. A faint glow, like something distant getting closer. I remember keeping my eyes closed on purpose, just to see what it would do. The light wasn't a color I could name properly. Not bright white, not yellow. Something softer, but still clear enough that I could tell it wasn't just darkness anymore. It spread evenly across my vision, like it wasn't coming from one direction. Just everywhere. I frowned a bit, still lying there, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then it got brighter. Not suddenly, gradually, like something increasing in intensity over time. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark. Exactly how it should have been. The curtains were shut, no light from outside, no glow from electronics except the faint numbers on my clock. I blinked a couple of times, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing unusual. I lay there for a second, waiting for the glow to come back. It didn't. I turned my head slightly and looked at the clock. 2:11 a.m. That seemed about right. I'd gone to bed maybe 20 minutes earlier. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes again. At first, there was nothing, just darkness. Then, slowly, it started again, that same faint glow. Building. I kept my eyes closed, paying closer attention this time. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, it just increased. Steady. I noticed something else. There was no sense of direction to it. It wasn't like light coming from the left or right. It felt like it was behind everything. Flat. Even. I shifted slightly in bed just to see if movement changed anything. It didn't. The glow continued to build, a bit brighter than before. I opened my eyes again. The room was still completely dark, no change at all. I pushed myself up slightly, leaning on one elbow. Checked the room more carefully this time. The door was closed. No light bleeding in from the hallway. The window was the same as before. Nothing outside. I checked the clock again. 2:17. I froze for a second. That didn't make sense. I was sure it hadn't been that long. It felt like maybe a minute or two since I last checked. not 6. I stared at the numbers for a bit, waiting to see if they'd jump or correct themselves. They didn't. I sat there, trying to think back. I didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember drifting off. I'd been aware the whole time, or at least it felt that way. I lay back down slowly. My chest felt slightly tight, not from fear exactly, just from how focused I'd gotten. I closed my eyes again. Darkness. For a few seconds. Then the glow returned. Stronger this time. It didn't start as faint, it was already there, just below the level where I'd opened my eyes before. I stayed still, watching it. It kept building. I noticed that my breathing had slowed without me meaning to, like my body had adjusted to something. The glow grew brighter. Not blinding, but enough that it felt unnatural. I had this strong urge to open my eyes again, but I didn't. I wanted to see how far it would go. The brightness reached a point where it felt like it should be lighting the room, but I knew it wasn't, because I wasn't seeing it when my eyes were open. That's what didn't sit right. It was only there when I wasn't looking directly at it. I opened my eyes suddenly. Dark, same as before. No light anywhere. I sat up fully this time. Checked the clock again. 2:29. I felt a drop in my stomach. There was no way that much time had passed. I hadn't moved, hadn't fallen asleep, at least not that I remembered. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The room felt normal. No strange temperature, no sounds. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside looked normal. Empty street. No lights except the distant glow from a street lamp further down. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The clock. I looked at it again. 2:29. The seconds weren't moving. I stepped closer. They stayed frozen. I reached out and tapped it lightly. Nothing. Then suddenly it changed. 2:30. The seconds started moving again. I stood there for a second, watching it tick. Everything seemed normal again. I went back to the bed and sat down. I didn't lie back immediately. I just sat there, trying to piece together what had happened. Then, without thinking, I closed my eyes again. The glow was still there. Not building anymore. Just present. Faint. Like it had settled into the background. I opened my eyes immediately. Dark. I didn't close them again after that. I stayed sitting up for a while, watching the clock. The time moved normally. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I lay back down, but I kept my eyes open. I must have fallen asleep at some point after that. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same. The clock was working fine. But when I thought back to it, I realized something I couldn't explain. I couldn't remember exactly when the glow had been the brightest. There wasn't a clear point where it peaked, just a sense that it had reached something. And I hadn't seen it when it did. I woke up because the alarm wouldn't stop. It wasn't the main house alarm, just the motion sensor we had set up in the backyard. It was supposed to ping my phone once if something moved back there, usually just a cat or the neighbor's dog getting through the fence. That night it kept going off, one notification after another, every few seconds. My name's Callum. I live in a detached place with a small fenced garden out back. Nothing big, just a patch of grass, a shed, and a motion camera mounted under the gutter pointing straight across the lawn. I grabbed my phone off the bedside table. 16 notifications in a row, all from the same sensor. I sat up, still half asleep, trying to process it. Usually it triggers once, maybe twice if something lingers. This was constant. I opened the app and checked the live feed. The backyard looked normal. Dark, lit only by the weak security light over the door. The grass looked still. No movement. I stared at it for a few seconds. Nothing changed. Another notification came through while I was watching. The sensor triggered again, but the feed didn't show anything moving. I frowned, leaned closer to the screen. Still nothing. I scrolled back to the recorded clips. The app saves short recordings every time the sensor goes off. I tapped the most recent one. The clip loaded. At first it looked normal, empty yard. Then I noticed the grass, right in the middle. It was bending, not like wind, not random. It was moving in a circle, a clean, almost perfect circle, maybe 6 or 7 feet across. The blades of grass were all pressed down at once, forming a ring. Then they lifted, slowly, like whatever had pushed them down was gone. The clip ended. I watched it again. Same thing. No shadow, no shape, just the grass reacting to something that wasn't there. I felt more awake now. I checked the next clip. Same spot, same movement. The circle formed again, grass flattening outward, then rising back up. No sound in the recording. No visible cause. Just that motion. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The alarm pinged again. Another clip saved. I didn't open it yet. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The backyard looked exactly like it did on the feed. Still, empty. I couldn't see the grass moving from that angle. I stayed there for a moment, watching. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed again. I opened the newest clip. This one was different. The circle formed faster, more sudden. The grass pressed down sharply, like something had landed hard, then held, for a second longer than before, then lifted. I noticed something else. The center of the circle didn't move, just the outer ring, like the pressure was distributed around the edge. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Wind didn't do that. Animals didn't either. And there was nothing there. I went downstairs, didn't turn the lights on, just moved through the house quietly. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want whatever was out there to know I was watching. I reached the back door and stood there for a second, hand on the handle, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The cold air hit me right away. Still no wind. I stepped out onto the patio. The security light flicked on above me. The yard looked normal. Grass standing upright. No visible marks. I took a few steps forward. My shoes made a soft sound against the concrete, then the grass. I stopped near the edge of where I'd seen the circle in the footage. I looked down. Nothing, just grass. Slightly damp from the night air. I crouched and ran my hand over it. It felt normal. No flattened areas, no indentation. I stood back up and looked around. The fence line. The shed. Nothing out of place. I checked the sky. Cloudy. No stars visible. Just a dull gray ceiling. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. I opened the clip while still standing out there. The camera angle showed the yard from above, and there I was, standing just off to the side. But the circle was forming right behind me. The grass bent down in that same perfect ring. While I stood there, not reacting, I turned around immediately. The grass behind me was still. No movement. No sound. I looked back at the clip. The circle had already faded, the grass rising again. But I hadn't seen it happen. I was right there. I should have seen it. I played it again. Watched my own back in the frame, standing still, and just a few feet behind me, the grass bending like something had pressed down. I didn't feel anything. No vibration, no shift in the ground, nothing. I backed up slowly toward the house, kept my eyes on the yard. Nothing moved. I stepped onto the patio and went back inside. Locked the door. Checked the feed again. Another clip had been recorded. This time the circle formed closer to the shed. Same pattern, same size, same motion. I sat at the kitchen table and kept watching. The alerts slowed down after a while, then stopped completely. The last clip showed the circle forming one more time. Then nothing. The grass stayed still after that. No more movement, no more triggers. I stayed up until morning. Didn't go back to bed. When it got light out, I went back into the yard. Walked straight to where the circles had been. Nothing. No marks, no flattened patches, no sign anything had happened. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the movement, it was how precise it was, how clean the circle formed every time, and how it happened right behind me, without any sound or feeling like whatever was there was interacting with the ground, without touching anything else. And somehow, I couldn't even tell it was happening, even when I was standing right next to it. I noticed the first light go dim near the far end of the lot. My name's Kieran. I worked overnight security at a distribution warehouse just outside town. It wasn't a big operation, just a long rectangular building, loading bays on one side, a wide open car park in front, and a row of tall lights spaced evenly across it. My shift was usually quiet. Walk the perimeter every hour, check doors, sit in the little office watching the cameras. That night it was just after 2 a.m. Cold, no wind, sky mostly covered with low clouds, the kind that block out the stars but still glow faintly from whatever lights below. I was doing one of my outside checks, walking along the edge of the lot. Everything was normal. Lights buzzing faintly overhead, the usual hum you stop noticing after a while. Then the farthest light flickered, just once, then it dimmed. Not off completely, just weaker. I stopped walking. Looked down the row. All the other lights were still normal, bright, steady. I figured it was just a bulb going out. Happens. I took a few more steps, then the next light in line flickered. Same thing. A quick dip in brightness, then settling at a dimmer level. That's when I slowed down. It wasn't random. It was moving. The lights were dimming one after another, in a straight line, toward me. I stood there, watching. The third light flickered, dimmed. Then the fourth. Same pattern. No sound change, no buzzing or popping, just the light levels dropping in sequence, like something was passing under them or through them. I took a step back without really thinking. The next light in the line flickered, dimmed, closer now. I looked up at the one above me, still bright, still normal. I glanced toward the building. Everything else looked fine. No alarms, no movement inside, just that line of lights changing one by one. I felt that tight feeling in my chest start to build. Not panic, just awareness, like something was off in a way I couldn't explain. The next light dimmed, then the next, each one closer than the last. I stepped backward again, eyes tracking the progression. The pattern didn't change. Flicker, dim, pause, then the next. I realized I was breathing slower, like I was trying not to make noise, even though there was nothing to hear. I stopped moving. The light directly in front of me flickered, then dimmed. Now there was just one left between me and whatever was causing it, the one above me. I looked up again, still bright, still steady. Then something else caught my attention. Above the building, in the clouds, there was a pale glow, faint, barely noticeable at first, just a slightly brighter patch against the gray. I squinted, trying to focus on it. It didn't look like reflected light, more like something behind the clouds or within them. The shape wasn't clear, just a soft, diffused glow. But it wasn't moving like the clouds were. It stayed in one place. I glanced back down. The last light before me flickered, dimmed. Now it was just the one above me left. I felt the air shift slightly. Not wind, just a subtle pressure change, like the moment before a storm, but without any of the usual signs. The glow above the building grew a little brighter. Still faint, still contained, but more noticeable now. I looked up fully, trying to see more detail. The clouds didn't break, but the light behind them seemed to have shape, a vague outline, wide, flat, hard to define. I heard a faint sound, not from the lights, not from the building, from above. A low, almost electrical hum, very quiet, barely there. I looked back down. The light above me flickered, once, twice, then dimmed. Now the entire row behind me was darker. Every light in that straight line reduced to the same lower brightness. Everything else in the lot stayed normal. I stood there, right at the edge of where it had reached. The hum above me grew slightly stronger, still quiet, but more present. I looked up again. The glow in the clouds was directly overhead now, or close to it. The shape felt larger, more defined, even though I still couldn't see edges clearly. Just that it occupied space, that it was there. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down slightly. My ears popped, not painfully, just enough to notice. I swallowed. The pressure stayed for a second, then eased. I didn't move, didn't want to. The hum peaked for a moment, then dropped, and just like that, the glow faded, not slowly, just gone. The clouds returned to their normal dim gray. The hum stopped completely. At the same time, the lights behind me brightened, one by one, in reverse. Each one flickered back to full brightness, moving away from me this time, until the entire row was normal again. I stood there for a few seconds, not moving, listening. Everything sounded the same as before. The usual buzz of the lights, the distant, faint noise from the road miles away. Nothing unusual. I looked up again. Nothing. Just clouds. I walked back toward the building slowly, checked the panel inside. No faults, no outages recorded. Everything looked normal. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just the lights. It was how they dimmed in a straight line toward me. Like something was moving across that space. Something I couldn't see. And how the glow above matched it, like whatever passed over the lot was affecting everything beneath it, for just those few seconds, before it moved on, and left everything exactly how it was before. The object went into the water during the worst part of the storm. I was out on Ashford Reservoir because I'd made the kind of dumb choice that feels reasonable at 5 in the morning and insane by noon. The forecast had said scattered showers, maybe thunder later, but nothing serious until evening. I'd been fishing that reservoir since I was a kid, and I knew the weather could turn fast in the valley. But The bass were moving, and I'd had 2 good weekends in a row. So I went. By the time I realized I should head in, the sky had already gone green-gray over the western ridge. The wind came across the water hard enough to slap spray over the bow of my little aluminum boat. I had one rod still out, a rain jacket half-zipped, and both hands on the trolling motor, trying to keep the boat pointed toward the access ramp. Ashford wasn't huge, but in bad weather it felt a lot bigger. The far shore disappeared behind rain. The dam lights looked smeared and distant. Every sound flattened under the storm except the slap of water against the hull and the occasional crack of thunder rolling between the hills. I was maybe 200 yards from the ramp when the light appeared. At first I thought it was lightning reflecting in the water, but it didn't flash and vanish. It stayed there, low over the reservoir, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the surface. Pale yellow, almost white at the center, not bright enough to light up the whole lake, but strong enough that the rain looked silver around it. It moved slowly against the wind. That was the first thing I couldn't make fit. Everything else on the water was getting pushed east. My boat, the chop, even leaves and sticks. This thing drifted west, smooth and steady, like the storm wasn't touching it. I killed the trolling motor without thinking. The boat turned sideways in the waves. Water slapped over the gunwale and soaked my boots. I grabbed the side to steady myself and kept staring. The light stopped over the deeper part of the reservoir, near the old flooded roadbed. I knew that spot well. If you had a fish finder, you could still see where the road dropped under, 2 faint lines of raised gravel crossing the bottom. The object hung there for a few seconds. Then the rain around it stopped. Not everywhere, just in a circle around the light. The storm kept hammering the water around me, but beneath the glow, the surface went smooth like a sheet of black glass. I remember saying, "What the hell?" out loud, but my voice sounded small and useless. The light sank. It didn't fall. It didn't splash. It lowered itself into the reservoir like it was going through a surface that wasn't water. The glow touched the black water, and the smooth circle widened. No steam, no ripple, no bubbling. Then it was gone. For maybe 3 seconds after, the water stayed flat in that circle. Then the storm filled it back in all at once. The waves started again. The rain hit. The wind shoved my boat sideways so hard I almost lost my footing. I got the motor going and headed for the ramp. The whole ride back, I kept looking over my shoulder. I expected the light to come back up. I expected something to float, a piece of metal, a buoy, anything. Nothing did. At the ramp, I had trouble getting the boat onto the trailer because my hands were shaking. A guy in a red pickup was parked under the trees, waiting out the storm. He watched me struggle for a minute, then came over and helped crank the winch. "You picked a hell of a morning," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You see anything out there?" He squinted toward the reservoir. Rain ran off the brim of his cap. "Like what?" I almost told him. Then I looked at the water and felt stupid. "Lightning," I said. He laughed. "Plenty of that." I drove home soaked and cold, with the heater on full blast and my wipers barely keeping up. My house was about 15 minutes from the reservoir, outside a small town in Western Virginia. I lived alone, worked maintenance for the county schools, fished when I could. Nothing complicated. I spent the rest of that day replaying what I'd seen. By evening, I'd convinced myself it had to be a drone. Maybe a weather balloon with a light, maybe some kind of emergency flare, something from the dam, something from the power company. But none of those explained how it went into the water without a splash. The next morning, I called the reservoir office. I didn't tell the whole story. I just said I'd been out during the storm and saw a bright object go into the water near the old roadbed. I asked if they'd lost equipment or if anyone had reported a flare. The woman on the phone got quiet. Then she asked my name. That bothered me, but I gave it. She asked what time. I told her around 11:30. She asked if I saw smoke, debris, or anyone else on the water. I said no. She said they'd make a note of it and thanked me for calling. That was it. 2 days later, the men came to my house. It was late afternoon, cold and damp after another day of rain. The yard was muddy and the creek behind my shed had risen enough that I could hear it from the kitchen. I was eating a sandwich over the sink when a car rolled into my driveway. I didn't hear it until the tires crunched on the gravel right outside the window. It was a black sedan. Not shiny exactly, but clean in a way that looked wrong against the mud. No dealer sticker, no visible plate on the front. The windows were dark and the car sat too level, like it didn't have suspension. Two men got out. They both wore dark coats despite the wet air being more chilly than cold. One was tall and narrow, with a long face and dark hair combed flat against his head. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a soft smile that seemed to arrive before the rest of his expression. They walked to the porch without looking around. I wiped my hands and opened the door before they could knock. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to hear it. The taller one stopped with his hand raised. "Mr. Abel Norris?" he said. "Yeah." He lowered his hand slowly. "We're following up regarding an observation at Ashford Reservoir." I kept one hand on the door. "You with the reservoir office?" "In relation to it," the shorter man said. That wasn't an answer. "What do you want?" "To clarify a few details," the tall one said. "It won't take long." I didn't invite them in. They didn't ask. They just stood on the porch under the sagging awning while rainwater dripped from the gutter beside them. Their shoes were clean. Not just mostly clean, completely clean. No mud on the soles, even though my driveway was soft enough to leave boot prints. The tall man took out a small notebook. "You reported a luminous object entering the reservoir during a storm." "I reported something going into the water," I said. "I don't know what it was." "That's appropriate," he said, writing something down. The shorter one looked past me into the house. His eyes moved to my kitchen table, where I had a paper map of the reservoir unfolded because I'd been trying to mark where it happened. "You identified the old roadbed," he said. I didn't like that. "I fish there." "Yes," he said, "frequently." "How would you know that?" The tall man smiled faintly. "Patterns are useful." I almost closed the door then, but I wanted answers more than I wanted them gone. "What was it?" I asked. Neither of them reacted. The shorter man said, "We're more interested in what happened afterward." "Afterward?" "The water," the tall one said. "Did it respond normally afterward?" I stared at him. "What does that mean?" He wrote something before I answered, which made my skin tighten. "Did the surface behavior resume naturally?" he asked. "It was a storm," I said. "The waves came back." "How quickly?" "I don't know. A few seconds." The shorter man looked disappointed. Not dramatic, just a small lowering of his eyelids, a tiny shift in his mouth. The tall one asked, "No sustained calm?" "No." "No separation?" "What?" "No visible boundary between affected and unaffected water?" I thought of the flat circle under the light, black, smooth, untouched by rain. "For a few seconds," I said. He wrote that down fast. The shorter man asked, "Any odor?" "No." "Metallic taste?" "No." "Pressure in your ears?" I hesitated, because there had been something. Not during the sighting, but afterward, while I was hauling the boat onto the trailer. My ears had popped twice, and I'd thought it was from clenching my jaw in the cold. The shorter man saw the hesitation. "Brief pressure," he said. "I guess," I said. The tall one wrote it down. They asked whether my watch stopped, whether my phone lost power, whether the fish finder gave unusual readings. I told them I hadn't even turned the fish finder on because of the storm. The shorter man looked annoyed by that too, like I'd failed to collect data for them. "Did you see fish after the event?" he asked. "No, I was trying not to drown." The tall one's pen paused. The shorter man smiled politely. "Of course." The rain strengthened. Water drummed on the awning above them. Neither man blinked much. I noticed that after a minute, and couldn't stop noticing, their eyes stayed open too long, wet-looking but still. I said, "Look, if something hazardous went into the reservoir, people need to know." The taller man nodded. "They will if it becomes necessary." "If what becomes necessary?" "Notification." "That's not what I asked." "No," he said, "it wasn't." The shorter man looked toward the road, not at the car, past it toward the line of trees beyond my mailbox. "Has anyone else contacted you?" he asked. "No." "Have you posted about it?" "No." "Have you told family?" "No." "Why not?" I looked at him. "Because it sounds insane." He seemed satisfied with that. "Good," he said. "That helps." Something moved inside the sedan. I glanced over his shoulder. For a second, I thought there was a third person in the back seat. Just a pale shape behind the glass, upright and still. Then the shorter man shifted slightly, blocking my view. The tall one said, "You should avoid the reservoir for several days. I have a fishing tournament Saturday." "No," the shorter man said. "Not, you shouldn't. Not, we advise against it. Just no. I felt irritation cut through the fear. You don't get to tell me where to fish. The tall man looked at me with something close to pity. We can't tell you anything. We can only document what you do next. That was worse than a threat. I asked for their names. The tall one said Mr. Hale. The shorter one said Mr. Porter. No first names, no agency, no cards. I asked for ID. Mr. Hale reached into his coat, then stopped. He looked at Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter gave a tiny shake of his head. Hale smiled. Identification would complicate the record. I laughed once because it was that or yell. You two are really bad at sounding official. Porter's smile widened slightly. We're not official. Hale closed the notebook. We appreciate your cooperation, he said. I didn't cooperate. You answered? You answered. Before leaving, Porter paused at the porch steps. He turned back to me and asked very casually, have the fish started surfacing yet? I didn't answer. He nodded like my silence was enough. Then they walked to the sedan. The car had a rear plate, I noticed then, but it was blank. Not missing, not covered. A smooth white rectangle where numbers should have been. They got in, no engine sound, no reverse lights. The sedan rolled backward down the driveway, turned onto the road, and disappeared behind the rain. I stood on the porch until my socks got damp from windblown water. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of water. Not rain. Rain had stopped hours earlier. This was lapping. Soft, steady, close. I got out of bed and walked through the dark house following it. The sound seemed to come from the kitchen, then the mudroom, then the back door. When I opened the door, the yard was quiet. The creek behind the shed was running high, but not unusually. No water near the house. No smell except wet leaves. Then I noticed my fishing boots by the back step. They were full of water, both of them. Filled to the top, perfectly still, reflecting the porch light. I dumped them out and went back inside. The next morning, I drove to Ashford. I didn't take the boat. I told myself I just wanted to look from the dam. The sky was clear, bright and cold, and the reservoir looked normal from the overlook. Gray-blue water, a few gulls, a state maintenance truck parked near the spillway. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then I saw the first fish, a largemouth bass, maybe 3 pounds, that floating belly up near the rocks below me. Then another. Then 3 more near the intake tower. I walked down the path to the shoreline. The closer I got, the more I saw. Bluegill, crappie, shad, all floating still in the little coves, their pale bellies catching the morning light. Not everywhere. That was the strange part. Only in a wide arc near the old roadbed. I called the reservoir office again from the parking lot. Told them there was a fish kill. The same woman answered. When I gave my name, she got quiet. She said they already knew. I asked who reported it. She didn't answer. By afternoon, the county had closed the east access ramp. The official explanation was low oxygen after storm turnover. That happens in reservoirs sometimes. Fish die, water gets weird, people move on. But old Ray Muller, who'd fished Ashford longer than anyone, told me he'd never seen a kill like that after a cold rain. Wrong season, he said. Wrong water. 2 days later, I found a dead fish in my driveway. It was a crappie, stiff and dry, lying behind my truck, like someone had placed it there. Ashford was 15 minutes away. No animals had chewed it. No mud on it, no smell. There was a small round mark behind its gill, black at the edges. I shoveled it into a trash bag and drove it to the dump. For the next week, I saw the black sedan twice. Once outside the grocery store, parked across the lot with nobody inside. Once near the reservoir gate, sitting half hidden behind a line of pines. Both times, when I looked again, it was gone. I stayed away from Ashford for almost a month. When I finally went back, it was early morning and calm. No storm, no strange light. Just mist rising off the water and a heron standing near the reeds. I launched the boat because I was tired of being scared of a place I'd known my whole life. Out near the old roadbed, my trolling motor cut out. The water around the boat went flat. I mean perfectly flat. The rest of the reservoir had small ripples from the breeze, but around me there was a smooth circle maybe 30 feet wide. My boat stopped rocking. The air felt thick. I reached for the ignition. Before I touched it, something bumped the bottom of the hull. Not hard, just one dull tap, then another. I looked over the side. Fish were gathering under the boat. Dozens of them. Bass, bluegill, carp, all just below the surface facing the same direction. Not feeding, not circling, facing down, like something beneath them had their attention. I didn't wait. I grabbed the paddle and moved until the trolling motor kicked back on. The flat circle broke behind me with a soft slap, and the wind hit the boat again. At the ramp, my truck started on the second try. A folded note was tucked under the windshield wiper. The paper was dry, even though mist covered the glass. It said, "Water response delayed. Thank you for confirming." I drove home without the boat tied down properly and had to pull over twice to fix the strap. That evening, just after sunset, the landline rang. I hadn't used that phone in years. It came with the house, and I only kept it plugged in because my cell service was bad. I answered without thinking. For a few seconds, there was only a low hum, like wind over a bottle. Then Mr. Porter's voice said, "Mr. Norris, please avoid eating anything caught from Ashford." I didn't say anything. He added, "For now." The line clicked dead. I unplugged the phone. I haven't fished Ashford since. Sometimes I drive past the reservoir on my way.